Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, I'm just gonna type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I guess it's my turn. My name is Shannon Morgan. This happened in the middle of June, 1976. I was 17. It was a Friday night. I remember that much. The air was so thick you could almost chew it. The kind of hot, wet Florida night where your shirt sticks to your back 5 minutes after you walk outside. Me and my two friends, we were bored out of our skulls. Grove City wasn't exactly a hub of excitement. There was a movie theater, a diner, and a whole lot of nothing. So when you got bored, you found weird stuff to do. That night, we ended up on this old dirt road that cuts through some private land out near the edge of town. It wasn't our land, but nobody ever really bothered us. The road led back to a small, kind of scummy pond we used to go to sometimes. We had these big, heavy metal flashlights, the kind that felt like you could use them as a club if you had to. The batteries were fresh, so the beams were strong, cutting white tunnels through the pitch black. It was around 9 o'clock. The cicadas were screaming, and you could hear the occasional plop of a frog in the water. We were just walking, not really talking, just shining our lights around at the trees, the Spanish moss hanging down like creepy old curtains. I remember the beam of my light catching the eyes of a possum up a tree, glowing red for a second before it scurried away. We laughed about it, a nervous kind of laugh because the woods at night always put you a little on edge. Even if you won't admit it, then I saw it. Movement, not the quick skittery kind from a raccoon or a deer. This was bigger, slower, a shifting of shadows between the pine trees and palmetto bushes off to the right of the road. I stopped walking and my friends stopped with me. "Shine your light over there," one of them whispered, his voice tight. I lifted my flashlight, my hand already feeling a little unsteady. The beam swept across the trunks and leaves, and then it landed on it, and it just stopped. It was massive. I'm not just saying tall, I'm saying huge. It had to be 7 feet tall, easy. It was standing upright on 2 legs, but it wasn't standing like a man. Its posture was different, sort of stooped, with these incredibly long, powerful-looking arms that hung down past its knees. It was covered in this long, shaggy hair, a dirty brown color that looked almost black in the shadows. It wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears. This wasn't that. A bear walks on all 4s most of the time, and its shape is different. This thing was built like a person, but a person made of solid muscle and covered in a thick pelt of hair. When my light hit it, it froze. It had been sort of moving through the trees, but it just stopped dead. Then, real slow, it turned its head towards us. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was mostly in shadow, but I could see the shape of its head, blocky, and the way the light glinted off what must have been its eyes. My heart just dropped into my stomach. It felt like a cold rock was sitting in my gut. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. We were all just frozen there, 3 stupid kids with flashlights staring at this thing. And then it made a sound. It was a growl, but not like a dog. It was deeper, lower. It came from its chest, and I felt it more than I heard it. A deep, rumbling vibration that went right through me and made the hair on my arms and the back of my neck stand straight up. It was a sound of pure warning, a sound that said, "Get out." The sound seemed to break the spell holding us. The creature took a step back, then another, moving with this weird fluid grace into the thicker brush. It didn't run. It just melted into the darkness and was gone. For a second, none of us said anything. We just stood there, our flashlight beams shaking, pointed at the empty spot where it had been. The only sound was the cicadas, which now seemed deafening. Holy shit, one of my friends finally breathed out. What the hell was that? We didn't have an answer. We all started talking at once, voices low and frantic. Was it a bear? A guy in a suit? But we all knew deep down that it wasn't. The way it moved, the way it stood, that growl, it was all wrong. We practically ran back to the car, which was parked a half-mile down the dirt road, where it met the paved street. Our flashlights swung wildly, illuminating every stump and bush like it was about to come to life. Every snap of a twig made us jump. We piled into the car, a beat-up old sedan, and locked the doors. We just sat there for a few minutes, breathing hard, the windows fogging up from our panicked breaths. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? We saw something terrifying, we got scared, we left. But that's not how it works when you're 17 and your brain is wired for stupid. The fear started to fade, replaced by this burning, itching curiosity. What was that? Did we really see it? We had to know. So against every ounce of good sense we possessed, we decided to go back. We drove into town, got some sodas from the gas station, just trying to act normal. But we were all buzzing with this nervous energy. We talked ourselves into it. We'd go back, just to the edge of the pond, and shine our lights around. If we didn't see anything, we'd leave for good. It was probably just a bear, we told ourselves. A weird-looking bear. It was around midnight when we pulled back onto the dirt road. This time, we didn't park as far away. We left the car running, the headlights pointing down the road as a sort of beacon. The woods were even darker now, the air a little cooler. It was dead quiet. The cicadas had stopped. That was the first thing I noticed. The woods were never this quiet. We walked slowly towards the pond, our footsteps crunching way too loud on the gravel. The pond was up ahead, a patch of slightly less black darkness. We stopped about 20 yards from the water's edge, not saying a word. We just stood there listening. That's when we heard it, a loud, deliberate crack. The sound of a thick branch breaking, not a random snap, but a sound with force behind it. It came from the far side of the pond. My friend lifted his flashlight, his hand trembling so bad the beam jittered across the surface of the water. He swept it towards the sound, and there it was again. It was hunched over at the water's edge, its back to us. It was so much bigger than I remembered. Its shoulders were massive, rounded mounds of muscle under that long brown hair. It was dipping its hands into the water, bringing them up to its face. It was drinking. We just watched, completely mesmerized and utterly terrified. It was so normal, just an animal getting a drink. For a second, the fear lessened, replaced by this bizarre sense of observation. We were seeing something nobody was supposed to see. Then it stopped. It went perfectly still. Its head lifted slightly, like it was sniffing the air. It had heard us, or smelled us. Slowly, it turned its upper body to look over its shoulder. My friend's flashlight was still on it, and this time we got a better look at its profile. A heavy brow ridge, a flattened nose. It wasn't a mask. It wasn't a person. It saw us. In one motion that was shockingly fast for something so huge, it pushed itself up to its full height. It turned to face us completely, and this time it didn't just growl. It opened its mouth and let out this roar. It wasn't a lion's roar. It was lower, guttural, and it was filled with pure rage. It was so loud it felt like it was punching me in the chest. The sound echoed across the pond, silencing the entire world. That was it. That was all we needed. We didn't think, we just ran. We dropped our flashlights. I heard mine clatter on the ground and go out, and we just bolted. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning, my legs were jelly, but pure adrenaline carried me. I could hear my friends right behind me, their panicked breaths and pounding feet. I didn't look back. I was too scared of what I might see gaining on us. We slammed into the car, fumbling with the doors, scrambling inside. My friend who was driving just stomped on the gas, the tires spinning in the dirt before catching and shooting us backwards onto the paved road. We sped all the way into town, not saying a word, just white-knuckling it the whole way. We ended up at the sheriff's department, We must have looked like a mess, pale, sweating, breathing hard. The deputy at the desk, an older guy with a tired look on his face, listened to us babble for a minute before he held up a hand. "Whoa, slow down, kids. You saw a what?" We told him again. "A big hairy thing, walking on two legs, by the pond out on the old Miller property." We told him about the growl, the roar. He sighed, like he'd heard it all before, but he was a decent guy. He said, "All right, let's go take a look. But if this is a prank, you're washing patrol cars for a month." So we led him back out there in his cruiser. It was probably 1 in the morning by then. He had this big, powerful spotlight mounted on his side window that he could control from inside. He told us to stay in the car. We weren't about to argue. He drove slowly down the dirt road, the headlights and the spotlight sweeping back and forth. The woods were still dead quiet. He stopped the car near the pond, right about where we'd been standing. He played the spotlight over the trees, across the water. For a few minutes, nothing. I started to feel stupid. Maybe we had imagined it. Maybe it was just a bear. Then the deputy stopped moving the light. He had it trained on a spot in the trees, maybe 50 yards away. "What in the world?" he muttered, more to himself than to us. He leaned forward, adjusting the spotlight. And there it was. It was just standing there watching us. It hadn't run. It was half hidden by a tree. But the spotlight caught it full in the face. I'll never forget that sight. The light was so bright. Its hair wasn't just brown. It had a reddish tint to it, like rusty iron. The face was ape-like, but not like any ape I'd ever seen in a book. The eyes were deep-set and dark, and they reflected the light back at us with a faint, dull glow. The mouth was a wide line. It just stared at the car, not moving. The deputy just stared for what felt like a full minute. He finally whistled, low and soft. "That is one big son of a gun," he whispered. He reached for his radio microphone, his eyes never leaving the thing outside. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm out at the Miller Pond off Route 776, and I've got a visual on a large animal requesting backup." He never got to finish his request. The creature, still staring right at us, took a step, then another. It didn't run, it didn't charge, it just turned and started walking away, calmly, deliberately, into the deeper forest. It moved with this strange, purposeful stride, pushing aside small saplings like they were nothing. It didn't look scared. It looked annoyed, like we were a bunch of pests that had disturbed its night. We watched it until it disappeared into the darkness, the spotlight showing nothing but empty trees. The deputy slowly put the microphone back. He looked back at us in the rearview mirror. His face was pale. "You kids, you saw that thing earlier tonight?" We just nodded, unable to speak. He took us back to the station, filed a report. The next day, a couple of guys from the Fish and Wildlife Commission came out with the deputy and looked around the pond. They found a couple of impressions in the mud that could have been tracks, but they were too messed up to make a cast of. They found some long brown hairs caught on a broken branch near where the thing had been drinking. They collected them in a little baggie. I heard later they sent them off to some lab, but I never heard what came of it. Probably nothing. It always ends with nothing. But that was it for me. That one night, from 9 o'clock to just past 1 in the morning, changed everything. I didn't go back into those woods for years. I still get a tightness in my chest when I'm out camping and it gets too dark. The terror of that growl, the sheer size of its powerful form silhouetted against the trees, the way it just looked at us with those eyes. It's burned into my brain, all the old stories the locals told, the skunk ape, the swamp ape. I used to think they were just stories to scare kids, but I know now. I know they're real. And I know that on that hot June night it saw us and it let us go. I don't know why. I'll never know why. I just know that I saw it and it saw me, and nothing has ever been the same since. Story 2. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in late July, and my dad and I had decided to go fishing on this small lake in Ohio. I don't want to say exactly which one, because honestly I don't ever want to go back there. but it's one of those places that's usually quiet, surrounded by thick woods on most sides. We've been going there for years, mostly because it's away from the crowds and you can actually catch some decent bass. That day, we'd packed up our gear, grabbed some sandwiches and drinks, and headed out in our old aluminum boat. It's not fancy, just a little thing with a couple of seats, a trolling motor up front, and a bigger outboard motor on the back for when we need to move fast. The sun was high, and the air was so still you could hear every little noise around you. Bugs buzzing, birds chirping, that kind of thing. My dad had been up early for work, so after we found a spot near the shore where the water was deeper, he leaned back in his seat, put his hat over his face, and dozed off. I was fine with that. I liked the quiet sometimes. I was casting my line, watching the ripples spread out and just enjoying the peace. The water was calm, almost like glass, and the trees along the bank were so green they looked fake. I remember thinking how perfect it all was, how nothing could ruin a day like this. I'd been fishing for maybe an hour, not catching much, just relaxing, when I first heard it. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe a fish jumping or a bird landing in the water. But then it came again, and this time it was different. It was a rhythmic sound, like something heavy stepping through the shallow water near the shore. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Kaplu, gloomp, kaplu, gloomp. That's the best way I can describe it, like a big foot slogging through mud and water, with a squelch and a splash each time. I stopped reeling in my line and just listened. My heart started beating a little faster, but I told myself it was probably a deer or something. We've seen deer wading in there before, so I tried to shrug it off. But the sounds didn't stop. They kept coming, getting a bit louder, like whatever it was moving closer to the water's edge. I peered into the trees, but from where we were, about 30 feet from shore, I couldn't see much. The underbrush was thick, all shadows and leaves, and the sun was starting to angle down, casting long, dark streaks across the water. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something about the rhythm felt off, too heavy for a deer, too deliberate. I glanced over at my dad. He was still asleep, snoring softly. Part of me wanted to wake him, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. So I just sat there, gripping my fishing rod too tight, my knuckles turning white. Then, everything changed in an instant. The footsteps stopped, and for a second it was dead silent. No birds, no bugs, nothing. Like the whole world had frozen, and that's when I heard it, a deep, furious roar that ripped through the air. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. The best I can say is it sounded like an angry lion, but deeper, guttural, like it came from something massive. It vibrated in my chest, and I felt my breath catch. My dad stirred but didn't wake up. I was frozen, just staring at the shore, my heart hammering against my ribs. Right after the roar, there was this wild splashing, like something was thrashing in the water. Then came these high-pitched squeals, sharp and frantic, like an animal was being torn apart. It was horrible, the kind of sound that makes your skin crawl. I could hear the panic in those squeals, and I imagined something big and powerful killing whatever it was. The splashing was violent, water churning, and I saw ripples spreading out toward us. Fear shot through me like electricity. Whatever was out there, it was close, and if it could do that to another animal, what would it do to us? I didn't think. I just acted. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely move, but I reached for the trolling motor. We have this quiet electric one that we use for sneaking up on fish, and I turned it on low, pointing us away from the shore. I didn't want to make noise, didn't want to draw attention. The boat started drifting slowly, and I kept my eyes glued to the trees, half expecting to see something burst out. The squealing stopped abruptly, cut off like someone had flipped a switch, and the splashing died down. But then I heard heavy footsteps again, faster this time, splashing through the water like whatever it was moving along the shore, following us. My dad finally woke up, probably from the tension in the air or my frantic movements. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. and saw the panic on my face. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice groggy. I couldn't speak at first, just pointed toward the shore. He listened and his expression shifted from confusion to alarm. The footsteps were still there, getting closer, and then another roar echoed out, shorter this time, but just as deep and angry. It felt like a warning. "Start the big motor now," my dad said, his voice tight. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the oars and started paddling to help us move faster while I fumbled with the outboard motor. My fingers were numb with fear, and I dropped the key once before managing to get it in. The engine sputtered to life, and I revved it, the noise loud in the sudden silence. We shot forward, water spraying up around us, and I didn't look back until we were halfway across the lake. When I did, the shore was just a dark line of trees, and I couldn't see or hear anything anymore. But the image of those shadows and the memory of those sounds were burned into my brain. The ride back to the marina felt like forever. My dad was quiet, his jaw set, and I was trembling. My clothes stuck to me with cold sweat. The sun was lower now, casting an orange glow over everything, but it didn't feel warm anymore. It felt eerie, like the whole lake was watching us. We didn't talk much, just kept going until we saw the docks ahead. When we pulled in, my hands were still shaking so bad I could barely tie up the boat. We went inside the marina building, which is just a small shack with a counter for renting boats and selling bait. The guy there, an older fellow who's always working, looked up from his newspaper and smiled. "Back early, huh? Catch anything?" My dad shook his head, and I just stood there, trying to calm down. The guy must have seen how pale we were, because his smile faded. "Everything okay?" he asked. My dad explained what we heard, the footsteps, the roar, the splashing and squealing. He didn't embellish it, just told it straight. The guy listened, nodding slowly, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You know, over the years, a few people have reported seeing Bigfoot around here. Not many, but enough that I don't dismiss it." He went on to say that most sightings are near the wooded areas, and some folks have heard similar sounds, deep roars, heavy footsteps. He wasn't trying to scare us. He said it like it was just a fact, something he'd gotten used to hearing. We stayed there for a bit, drinking some water and trying to process it. My dad kept saying it was probably a bear or something, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Bears don't sound like that and they don't move that way. On the drive home, we were both quiet, and I kept replaying it all in my head, the rhythmic kaplu glump, the roar that felt like it shook the air, the terrified squeals. It all fit together in a way that made me sick to my stomach. For days after, I couldn't get those sounds out of my head. I'd be lying in bed, and I'd hear them again, clear as day. I started reading about Bigfoot sightings online, and I found stories that sounded a lot like mine. People talking about similar roars, footsteps in the water, that sense of being watched. It didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made it worse, because it meant that what we experienced might not have been a one-time thing. I've never been one to believe in cryptids or monsters, but now, I don't know. Something was out there that day. Something big and angry and powerful, and the thought that it might still be there, in those woods, waiting, it haunts me. I haven't been back to that lake since, and I don't think I ever will. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I still hear that roar in my dreams, and I wake up sweating, heart pounding, like it's happening all over again. I guess that's it. I don't have any answers, just this memory that won't let go. Story 3. It was March 2nd, 2007. I remember the date because it was a Friday, and I'd just gotten off work early. The sky was that flat grey colour it gets in Indiana in early March. Not quite winter, not quite spring. Everything was just sort of brown and dead. I was driving my Ford Explorer home down 200 North Road, a route I'd taken 1,000 times. My co-worker Dave was in his truck about 300 feet ahead of me. We'd left the plant at the same time, and I was just trailing behind him, not really in a hurry, just letting the day wind down. I had the heat on low, and the radio was playing some classic rock station quietly. I was just starting to relax, you know. My mind was on nothing in particular. What I might make for dinner, whether I should stop for groceries, normal stuff. Then Dave's brake lights flashed and his truck swerved hard into the oncoming lane before he corrected it. My first thought, my only thought, was deer. You see that a lot out on these back roads. A deer bolts out of the woods and you swerve to miss it. It's just a reflex, so I took my foot off the gas and eased my own foot onto the brake, ready for a deer to come bounding out in front of me too. But it wasn't a deer. This thing came out from the right side of the road, from the ditch line where the weeds were tall and brown. It came out walking on two legs. That's the first thing that really hooked into my brain. It was walking, but it was all wrong. It was hunched over, its back was really arched, and it moved in this struggling, labored way, like it was fighting to stay upright. Its arms were way too long, just hanging down past its knees, swinging awkwardly. The whole motion was unnatural. It wasn't graceful like an animal, and it wasn't right like a person. It was like it was mimicking a person, but its body wasn't built for it. The fur was a thick, shaggy black, matted and dark. My heart just slammed into my throat. I didn't even have time to think. My foot, which was already on the brake, stomped down. The anti-lock brakes shuddered under my foot. I tried to wrench the wheel to the left to go around it, but everything was happening too fast. There was a bump, a solid, jarring thump from the passenger side towards the back of the Explorer. It wasn't a huge crash, but it was definite. I felt it through the whole frame of the car. My hands were locked on the wheel, knuckles white. I came to a stop right in the middle of the lane. The engine was still running. For a second, I just sat there, breathing in little shallow gasps. My mind was a scrambled mess. What was that? Did I hit it? What did I hit? I looked into my rearview mirror, expecting to see, I don't know, a large dog maybe, lying in the road behind me. What I saw made the air freeze in my lungs. Something was standing up. It uncoiled from a crouch directly behind my vehicle, right where I must have clipped it. It was massive, 7 feet tall, easy. Its shoulders were incredibly wide, and they seemed to hunch up around its neck, which made its head look small in comparison. It was covered from head to toe in that same long black hair. It just stood there behind my SUV, and it was so big, it blocked my view of the road behind me. A cold fear, a physical coldness, started crawling up the back of my neck like ice water trickling up my spine. My scalp was prickling. This wasn't an animal I recognized. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have those proportions. This was something else. I saw that Dave had stopped his truck further up the road. His brake lights were still on. I couldn't just sit there. I had to do something. My hand was shaking so bad I could barely operate the power window button. I rolled the driver's side window down, the cold March air hitting my face. The silence outside was heavy, oppressive. No birds, no wind, just the idle of my engine. Dave's door swung open and he got out. He was looking past my vehicle at whatever was standing behind it. His face was pale, his mouth hanging open. He looked terrified. He shouted something, but his voice was thin and stretched with panic, and the word was just garbled noise. It might have been my name. It might have been, what the hell, I don't know. It was just a frightened yell. He started walking towards me, but he was moving slow, hesitant, his eyes glued to the thing behind my car. That's when the sound happened. It came from right beside my vehicle, maybe just a few feet from my open window. It wasn't a roar. It was a howl, but the deepest, roughest howl I have ever heard. It was low, so low I felt it in my chest more than I heard it with my ears. It was guttural, like rocks grinding together, but there was a tone in it, a weird, almost human-like quality that made my stomach turn to water. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of, I don't know, warning, anger. It was pure, raw power. Dave froze in his tracks. He just stopped dead, maybe 50 feet from me. his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated fear. My own head snapped forward, away from the mirror, to look out the windshield. The creature was moving. It seemed agitated by the howl, or maybe it was the one that made it. It was trying to stand fully on its two legs again, but it was struggling. Its body was fighting itself. It would get upright, then its back would hunch violently, and it would stumble forward, its long arms splaying out for balance. It looked clumsy, almost pathetic, but the sheer size and power of it made the clumsiness terrifying. It wasn't weak. It was just wrong. It was like watching a machine that was built wrong trying to function, then it gave up. It dropped forward, its front knuckles, or hands, I don't know what to call them, hitting the pavement, and then it ran. It dropped to all fours, and it ran into the woods on the left side of the road. But it didn't run like a bear, with a rolling gait. It ran fast, unnaturally fast, a fluid, silent blur of black. And it was silent. No pounding footsteps, no cracking twigs. 1 second it was there, a massive shape launching itself off the road, and the next it was just gone, swallowed by the bare trees and the shadows. The whole thing, from the time it stood up to the time it vanished, was maybe 10 seconds, 15 at most. The silence rushed back in louder than before. I sat there for another minute, maybe 2, just trying to breathe. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I could feel a fine tremor running through my whole body. I looked at Dave. He was still standing there, frozen, staring at the spot where the thing had disappeared. Finally, I put the car in park and killed the engine. The sudden quiet was jarring. My door felt heavy as I pushed it open and stepped out onto the asphalt. My legs were wobbly. Dave seemed to snap out of his trance and started walking towards me again, faster this time. "Shannon," he said, and his voice was a hoarse whisper. "What in God's name was that?" "I don't know," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me. "I think I hit it." We both looked at the back passenger side of my Explorer. There was a dent, a clear, concave dent in the rear quarter panel, just behind the wheel well, and there were scratches in the silver paint, deep ones, like from claws. But there was no blood, no tufts of fur, nothing. We walked over to the spot on the road where it had been standing. The pavement was clean. We scanned the ditch, the edge of the woods. Nothing. "Did you hear that? That sound?" Dave asked. He was rubbing his arms like he was cold. I just nodded. I couldn't even talk about the sound. Our eyes were both drawn to the tree line. The woods were dark and thick, even without leaves. Every shadow looked like it could be moving. Every normal sound, a distant crow, the creak of a tree, made us jump. Then I saw something weird. A fat brown groundhog was sitting on its haunches at the edge of the woods, maybe 20 yards away. It was just watching us. It didn't look scared. It didn't look alarmed. It was just calm, normal, and that for some reason was almost the most unsettling thing of all. After what had just happened, after that thing had just run through there, this normal, everyday animal was just sitting there, completely unbothered. It didn't make any sense. It felt like the world had broken its rules, and this groundhog hadn't gotten the memo. We looked at each other, and without a word, we both knew we weren't going into those woods. There was no trail, no broken branches that we could see from the road. It was just gone. "We should go," Dave said, his eyes still on the trees. I didn't argue. We got back into our vehicles. I started the Explorer, my hand still shaking as I turned the key. I did a 3-point turn right there in the road. I wasn't about to drive forward, closer to where it had run. Dave did the same. We drove back the way we came, towards town, going a lot faster than we should have. We didn't talk about it much after that. We told our boss we'd seen a weird animal on the road, that I'd hit it and damaged my car and left it at that. What else could we say? Who would believe us? The dent was there, the scratches were there, but that was it. No proof. But I think about it all the time. I'll be doing the dishes or trying to fall asleep, and I'll see it again, clear as day, standing up behind my car. That hunched, struggling walk, the way it moved, like it was fighting its own body. And that sound, that deep, rough, almost human howl that seemed to come from the earth itself. The terror wasn't just in seeing it, it was in the wrongness of it. It was in the way it defied everything I knew about the world. It looked like it was patched together from parts of different animals, and it moved in a way that nothing should ever move. The moment it stood up, when I saw its full height and width in my mirror, and then when it howled, that was the moment sheer, primal fear locked me in place. It's a feeling I've never felt before or since. It's a feeling that haunts me. I still drive down that road sometimes, but I'm always tense, my eyes always scanning the ditches. I never saw it again. I never found any answers. I just have the memory, the dent in my old Explorer that I eventually sold, and this cold, unsettled feeling that I saw something I was never supposed to see, something that should not exist, and the chilling certainty that it saw me too. Story 4. All right, so this is something I've never really talked about in detail, not even to my girlfriend, and it happened. God, it must be almost 3 years ago now. Late summer, I remember, because the air was still warm even after the sun went down. But there was that little bite in the wind that tells you autumn isn't far off in the UP. I was driving my old Ford F-150 to my girlfriend's place in Marquette County. She lived out past Harvey, one of those houses tucked back on a 2-track off the main road, surrounded by nothing but woods. Real quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy. I'd made this drive 100 times, probably more. I knew every pothole, every bend where the deer liked to jump out. I was cruising along, maybe 5 or 10 over the limit, just wanting to get there. The radio was on, some classic rock station fading in and out like they always do up there. My mind was on nothing in particular, just the week ahead, maybe what we'd do for dinner the next day. Normal stuff. It was fully dark by then. My headlights cut a tunnel through the blackness, the yellow lines on the asphalt just ticking by. The woods on either side of the road are thick up there, a solid wall of pine and birch that just swallows the light. You don't realize how isolated you are until you're out there at night, with no other headlights in sight for miles. I was coming around a gentle left-hand curve, the kind you don't even think about, you just ease the wheel, and that's when I saw them. They weren't deer. My brain registered that instantly. Deer freeze, their eyes glow. This was different, was. 2 enormous upright figures just stepped out of the tree line on the right and onto the road, right in the middle of my lane, maybe 50, 60 feet ahead. I didn't even have time to process what I was seeing, not really. It was all reaction. My foot slammed the brake, my hands jerked the wheel, but it happened so fast. The whole thing, from seeing them to ending up in the ditch, was probably 3 seconds. But in those 3 seconds, my brain took a snapshot. A perfect, horrible, detailed snapshot that's burned into the back of my eyelids. They were covered in dark hair, not like a bear's fur, which can look shaggy. This was different. It was long, almost ragged looking, and a deep, dark brown. Almost black in my headlights, and they were huge, I mean just massive. The one on the left was bigger, a male, I guess, though I don't know how I knew that. It was just this overwhelming feeling. He had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. His shoulders were unbelievably broad, like a powerlifter's, but on this giant frame. He wasn't lanky, he was solid, thick, powerful. The other one was slightly smaller. Still huge, don't get me wrong, way bigger than any man, but more slender in comparison. A female, she was a step behind him. They weren't running, they were just walking, crossing the road with this deliberate, calm stride that was somehow more terrifying than if they'd been charging. I didn't hear a sound, no roar, no screech, just the blast of my own tires screeching and the thumping of my heart in my ears. My truck didn't just stop. The back end lost traction when I jerked the wheel. I felt the whole world tilt. The tires on the passenger side dropped off the pavement with a jolt, and then we were sliding, the gravel on the shoulder crunching and pinging against the undercarriage. It wasn't a violent crash. It was more of a slow, grinding slide into a shallow drainage ditch. The front bumper dug into the opposite bank with a final jarring thud. The engine coughed and died. Silence. For a second, there was just this absolute ringing silence. Then the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I was breathing in these ragged, shallow gasps. I could smell the hot, metallic scent of the brakes and the damp, earthy smell from the ditch. My seatbelt was tight across my chest, and I remember the rough texture of the strap against my neck. My eyes were fixed on the road ahead. Where they had been, they were gone. But I saw where they went, just for a split second. As my truck was sliding, my headlights swept across the tree line on the left side of the road. I saw the bigger one, the male, step into the tree line. He didn't push branches aside, he just moved through them. They parted for him. It was that effortless. The smaller one was right behind him, and then the darkness just swallowed them whole. I sat there for I don't know how long. Could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 5 minutes. My brain was just empty. It was like a computer rebooting, trying to process data that made no sense. Bear, it suggested weakly. But bears don't walk like that. They don't have that posture. They're bulkier, closer to the ground. People in costumes, another part of my mind, the sane part, tried to argue. But nobody is 8 feet tall, and nobody could move with that kind of raw, unthinking power. It was like watching a force of nature, a walking storm. I finally unfroze enough to move. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get them off the wheel. I fumbled for the keys, my fingers slipping. I turned the ignition. The engine groaned, cranked once, twice, and then roared to life. The sound was deafening in the quiet. I threw the truck into reverse and gunned it. The tires spun in the mud and wet grass for a heart-stopping second, then caught. The truck lurched backward, metal scraping against dirt, and bumped up onto the asphalt. I slammed it into drive without even stopping, my foot stomping on the gas. The truck surged forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the road in front of me, but my whole body was turned, my skin crawling, expecting to see one of them standing in the bed of the truck or keeping pace with me alongside the road. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to get out. I felt cold all over, a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the evening air. The rest of the drive was a blur. I don't remember the turns. I just remember driving, gripping the wheel so tight my arms ached, my foot heavy on the accelerator. I kept checking the rearview mirror over and over again, expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or that massive dark shape emerging from the woods behind me. But there was nothing, just empty black road. I finally pulled into my girlfriend's driveway, the gravel crunching way too loud. I killed the engine and just sat there for a minute, listening to the blood pounding in my ears. The porch light was on, a normal, friendly light. It felt like I'd arrived on another planet. I got out of the truck and my legs were so wobbly I had to lean against the door for a second. I walked to the front of the truck. The grille was caked with mud and grass. The passenger side headlight was cracked, a spider web of lines across the glass. Physical proof. I hadn't imagined the ditch. She came to the door, smiling, but her smile faded when she saw my face. "You okay? You're white as a sheet." I just walked past her into the house. "Fine," I mumbled. "Just almost hit a deer, swerved into a ditch." It was the easiest lie. Everyone up here understands almost hitting a deer. It's a normal danger, a believable one. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't form the words. How do you say, "Honey, I just saw 2 Bigfoots cross the road"? You sound insane. I went to the sink and got a glass of water. My hand was still trembling so much the water sloshed over the rim. I could still see them, that calm, deliberate walk, the way the trees just opened up for them, the sheer size of them. The male's shoulders. It wasn't just tall, it was dense. It looked like it could have picked up my truck and thrown it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound from outside, a branch tapping the window, the wind, made me jerk awake. My heart instantly racing again. I'd lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the image would replay in my mind, the headlights illuminating them, the dark, matted hair, the effortless stride. The next morning, in the clear light of day, I almost convinced myself it was a trick of the shadows, a weird bear sighting. My mind trying to make sense of something unfamiliar. I went out and looked at my truck again. The mud, the cracked headlight. I definitely swerved into a ditch, but I knew, deep in my gut, in a place that doesn't listen to logic or reason, I knew. A few days later, I had to drive back home on the same road. It was broad daylight. Sunny. I slowed down way before I got to that curve. My hands got sweaty on the wheel. When I reached the spot, I pulled over onto the shoulder, right near where I'd gone into the ditch. I got out. The air was clean and smelled like pine. Birds were chirping. It was just a normal stretch of road. I walked over to the ditch. The marks from my tires were still there. Gouges in the soft earth. I looked across the road to where they'd emerged, and then to the other side where they'd disappeared. On their side of the road, the tree line was just a wall of green, impenetrable. I took a few steps into the woods, maybe 10 feet. The ground was soft with decades of fallen needles. It was quiet. And then I saw it. A few broken branches, about 7 feet off the ground, too high for a deer, and a single faint impression in the moss. It wasn't a clear footprint. It was just a depression, but it was long, really long, and it was shaped wrong for a bear. It was more oval. I didn't go any further. A cold dread, the same one from that night, washed over me again. It was real. It had all been real. I got back in my truck and drove away, and I've never stopped on that stretch of road again. I still drive it sometimes when I visit, but I'm always tense, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line, my foot hovering near the brake. I've read stuff online since then, other people's accounts, and a lot of them talk about the smell or hearing whoops and screams. I didn't get any of that. For me, it was the silence that was the worst. The sheer casual normalcy of it for them. They were just crossing the road. I was the one who was terrified. I was the one who crashed. They just moved on. They didn't even look at me. It was like I wasn't even there, just a minor obstacle in their path. I know what I saw. I don't call them Sasquatch or anything else. In my head, they're just what they are, the big one and the smaller one. Two creatures that shouldn't exist, stepping out of a myth and into the beam of my headlights on a quiet road in the Upper Peninsula. I didn't just see them, I felt them. I felt the air change. I felt this primal ancient fear that's hardwired into you, telling you that you are not the top of the food chain, that there are things in these woods that we don't understand and were never meant to see. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I think about that silence, and I wonder if they're still out there, just walking. Story 5, would you ask? It was spring of 2022 when it started, but the day everything really changed for me was June 12th. I remember the date because I'd just written it on a check to pay the electric bill that morning. I live alone in a small house in White County, Georgia, tucked back off a dirt road with woods on 3 sides. It's quiet. Usually too quiet. But that spring, the quiet started feeling different. It started feeling watched. It began with the garden. I'd put a lot of work into it. Tomatoes, cucumbers, a decent patch for carrots and squash. I came out one morning and found a whole section dug up, not like a rabbit or a deer. This was different. The plants were torn out, not eaten, just thrown aside, and the carrots were gone, pulled clean from the soil. A few squash were smashed, like something heavy had stepped on them. I figured it was raccoons, maybe a bear, though we don't get many black bears right up near the houses here. I was annoyed, more than anything. I put up a little chicken wire fence, thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week or so later, I saw it for the first time. It was just getting dark, that long, late spring twilight. I was taking my trash out to the bin at the side of the house. I caught a movement in the tree line, maybe 50 feet away. I stopped, squinted, and there it was, just standing there, partly hidden by a big pine tree. It was tall, So damn tall. I'd guess 7 feet easy. It was covered in this dark brown, almost black hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear. It was built like a person, a massive, broad-shouldered person. My brain just short-circuited. I stood there, my hand frozen on the trash can lid, and we just looked at each other for what felt like a full minute. Then it turned, and it moved into the woods. It didn't run, it just stepped away, and the shadows swallowed it. I remember my heart was hammering so hard I felt dizzy. I went inside and locked the door, and I must have checked the locks 5 times that night. That was the first time. After that, I saw it maybe a dozen times over the next couple of months. Always at a distance, always in the garden or at the edge of the woods. It never made a sound I could hear. It never acted threatening. It was just there, a presence. I started feeling like I was living in a fishbowl. I'd get this prickling feeling on the back of my neck when I was outside. The feeling you get when you know you're not alone. I told a couple of close friends. They joked about it, said I was seeing things, told me to set up a camera. So I did. I got a motion-activated light for the backyard and a basic trail camera I strapped to a tree facing the garden. The camera got a few things. Blurry, dark images. A massive, dark shape caught in the burst of the motion light. Nothing clear. Nothing you could show someone and say, see, here it is. It was just enough to make me feel less crazy, but more scared, because it was real. It was really coming around. Weekly, like clockwork, I started to almost expect it. The dread would build, and then I'd see a shadow or find the garden disturbed again, and this cold confirmation would settle in my stomach. But June 12th was different. That was the day the distance closed. It was a hot, sticky day. The kind of humidity that makes your shirt stick to your back 5 minutes after you walk outside. I'd been working from home, and I was just tired. Tired from the heat, tired from the low-grade, constant anxiety that had become my normal. I remember making a simple dinner, eating it on the couch while watching some forgettable TV, and just feeling utterly drained. I decided to turn in early. It was a Saturday, so there was no alarm to set. I remember looking at the clock on my stove as I headed down the hall to my bedroom. It was 10:30. My bedroom is at the back of the house. It has a window that looks straight out into the backyard, and beyond that, the woods. I usually keep the blinds closed, but that night I'd left them open a couple of inches at the bottom to let some air in. I have a small window unit AC, but it's loud, and sometimes the silence is better. I got into bed, turned off the lamp on my nightstand, and just lay there in the dark. The house was quiet. The only sound was the faint buzz of insects outside. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was awake. Instantly, completely awake. Not the groggy kind of waking up, but the kind that hits you like a bucket of ice water. My eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. I didn't move. I just listened. Everything was dead silent. The insect chorus had stopped. That was the first thing that registered. The woods were never silent, not in June. The hair on my arms stood up. Slowly, so slowly, I turned my head on the pillow to look towards the window, and I saw it. The motion light hadn't come on. There was just the faint ambient glow from a distant neighbor's yard light, casting the world in shades of deep blue and black. It was standing right there. Its face was in the gap at the bottom of the blinds, peering into my room. It was so close, maybe 5-6 feet from the glass. I could see the details I'd never been able to make out from a distance. The head was large and blocky, sitting on a thick, powerful neck. The hair on its face was shorter, tighter to the skin, and its eyes, they weren't glowing or red or anything like in the stories. They were dark, deep-set, but they caught what little light there was, and they were intelligent. There was a curiosity in them, a calm, intense study. It wasn't snarling, it wasn't baring its teeth. It was just looking at me, in my bed, in what was supposed to be the safest place in my world. My breath froze in my lungs. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a painful, frantic rhythm. I was paralyzed. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move to reach for my phone on the nightstand. I couldn't even blink. I was trapped in that stare. I could smell it. That's a detail I'll never forget. Through the glass, through the tiny crack in the window, a smell drifted in. It was musky, earthy, like wet dog, but mixed with something else, something wild and old, like damp soil and rotten leaves. It was the smell of the deep woods, the places where people don't go. It just stood there peering in. Its head was tilted slightly, like a dog hearing a new sound. I could see the texture of its hair, the way it lay in thick, matted cords over its massive shoulders. I could see the sheer bulk of it, blocking out the view of the entire lower part of the window. It was so real, so physical, so there. This wasn't a shadow or a blurry photo. This was a living thing, a ton of muscle and bone and wildness, standing inches from where I slept. Time stopped. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been 10 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. My mind was racing, a frantic, silent scream inside my head. What does it want? Is it going to break the glass? Is it going to reach in? I thought about the stories, the ones where these things are supposed to be aggressive. But this one, it didn't feel aggressive. It felt inquisitive, and that was almost worse. Its curiosity felt more dangerous than any clear threat, a threat you can understand. Curiosity is unpredictable. Then, ever so slowly, it moved. It didn't startle or jump. It just straightened its head, its dark eyes still fixed on me for one last, endless second, and then it turned and walked away. I didn't see it move into the woods. It just melted back into the darkness beyond my window, becoming part of the night again. The second it was gone, the sounds came back. The crickets, the frogs. It was like someone had unmuted the world. I sucked in a ragged, painful breath, my body finally unlocking. I scrambled out of bed, my legs so weak I almost fell. I stumbled to the window and yanked the cord to close the blinds all the way, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. I stood there for a minute, just leaning against the wall, trying to breathe, trying to get my heart to slow down. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I went and got my kitchen knife, the big one, and I sat on my couch in the living room with all the lights on. I just sat there, holding the knife, listening to every little creak and groan the house made. The smell, that musky, earthy smell, lingered in my nostrils for hours. When the sun finally came up, I went outside. I went to the window first. There, in the soft dirt of the flower bed were the footprints. They were huge, long, wider than my hand, with 5 distinct toes. The impression was deep, like whatever made them was immensely heavy. I just stared at them. It was proof, solid, physical proof that I wasn't dreaming, that it had really been there. I got my trail camera from the tree. The motion light hadn't gone off, but the camera had. It had taken a burst of photos. They were almost completely black. But in one of them, if you brighten it up on a computer, you can see a massive dark shape right up against the lens. A blur of dark hair and a sliver of light, catching on a dark, pupilless eye. It's the clearest evidence I have. It kept coming back after that, but never that close to the house again. The weekly visits continued for a few more months, then they just stopped. The last time I saw it was in late September, just a dark shape moving between the trees at dusk. It didn't even look my way. I still live here. I still have the garden, though I don't grow carrots anymore. Every now and then, I'll get that feeling, the prickling on my neck, and I'll stop what I'm doing and scan the tree line. I never see anything, but I know it's out there. I have the photos, I have the memory of its eyes, and I have the smell of the deep woods stuck in my brain. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know why it was so curious about me. I don't tell people anymore. What would I even say? That a 7-foot-tall, hairy man thing stared into my soul through my bedroom window one night. They'd lock me up. So I just keep it to myself, and I make sure my blinds are always closed. Story 6. I parked my car near the entrance and decided to head straight for the frog effigy. It's this weird ancient mound shaped like a frog that's kind of a landmark in the park. I've always liked sitting up there because it gives you a good view of the river and the embankment below. The grass was a bit damp from dew earlier, but it had dried out by then, and I could smell that mix of wet earth and pine that always reminds me of camping trips as a kid. I wasn't in any hurry, so I took my time walking up the path, just listening to the birds and the distant sound of the Illinois River flowing. It was one of those days where everything felt normal, almost boring in a good way, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this place so close by. When I got to the top of the effigy, I sat down on the grass and just stared out at the view. The embankment slopes down pretty steeply from there to the river, covered in thick bushes and trees, with a few rocky patches here and there. I've hiked down there before, and it's rough, loose soil, thorny plants, and lots of places where you could easily trip if you're not careful. But from up high, it all looks peaceful, like something out of a postcard. I pulled out my water bottle and took a sip, feeling the sun on my face, and for a while, I just zoned out, not really thinking about anything important. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this rustling sound from below. At first, I thought it was probably a deer or something. They're common around here, and I've seen them plenty of times. But this was different. It was louder, more deliberate, like something big was moving through the brush. I leaned forward, squinting to see better, and that's when I noticed movement on the embankment. It was down near the bottom, close to where the trees get really dense. My heart kind of skipped a beat because whatever it was moving fast, way faster than any animal I've ever seen in these woods. I stood up slowly, not wanting to make any noise, and that's when I got a clear look. This massive, upright figure was barreling down the slope, covered in dark, shaggy hair that looked almost black in the sunlight. It was huge. I mean, taller than a person, with broad shoulders and this powerful build that made it seem like it was tearing through the terrain without any effort. I've heard stories about Bigfoot, you know, from podcasts and online forums, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. But seeing this thing in person, it was like every description I'd ever heard came to life right in front of me. The way it moved was what really got to me. It wasn't just running. It was like it was flowing down the hill, its legs pumping in this fluid motion that made it look unstoppable. I could hear branches snapping under its weight, loud cracks that echoed in the quiet air, and the crunch of vegetation as it plowed through bushes and small trees. It didn't slow down or hesitate, even on the steep parts where I'd have to cling to roots to keep from sliding. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. I was frozen, just staring, with my hands gripping the sides of my jeans so tight my knuckles turned white. I kept waiting for it to look up or something, to show its face, but it never did. It was focused on getting down to the river, and it moved so fast that I couldn't make out any details beyond the dark fur and the sheer size of it. There was no smell, which I've heard people talk about in these encounters, like a foul odor or something, but maybe the wind was blowing the wrong way, or I was too far up to notice. All I could focus on was the sound and the sight of it, this thing that shouldn't exist, barreling through a place I thought I knew. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a bear. But bears don't run upright like that, not for that long, and not that fast. And the hair was too long, too uniform, like it was meant to blend into the shadows. The terror started to build in my chest, this heavy, suffocating feeling that made it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, to get out of there, but my legs felt like jelly, and I was afraid that if I moved, it might notice me. So I just stood there, watching as it reached the bottom of the embankment and plunged into the thick vegetation near the riverbank. The second it disappeared into the bushes, the sound stopped almost instantly. One moment, there was all that noise, the snapping, the crunching, and then nothing. Just the normal sounds of the park, birds chirping, the river flowing, the wind in the trees. It was like it had never been there at all. I stayed there for what felt like forever, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, just staring at the spot where it vanished, half expecting it to reappear or for something else to happen, but nothing did. The woods were quiet again. Too quiet. And the peacefulness I'd felt earlier was gone, replaced by this eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. Eventually, I managed to force myself to move. I stumbled back down from the effigy, my heart still pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I didn't look back as I hurried to my car, my hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The whole drive home, I kept replaying it in my head over and over, trying to find some logical explanation, but there isn't one. I saw what I saw, and no matter how much I tell myself it was a trick of the light or my imagination, I know it was real. I've been sitting here at my kitchen table for hours now, just staring at the wall, and I still can't shake the feeling that I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to. That park has always felt like a safe place to me, but now I don't know. Whatever that thing was, it's out there, and the thought of it lurking in the wild spaces of Illinois, so close to where people live and hike, is enough to keep me up at night. I don't have any answers, and I probably never will, but I had to share this because if I keep it to myself, I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. Oh, Story 7. The forest was exactly how I imagined it. Thick with pine trees, the ground soft under our boots, and that smell of wet soil and pine needles that always makes me feel calm. We started on a trail we'd looked up online, something that promised a good view of the river after a few miles. For the first couple of hours, it was just us and the sounds of the woods. Birds chirping, the rustle of leaves, our own footsteps crunching on the path. Jason was ahead of me, humming some tune, and I was just taking it all in. We're both experienced hikers, so we weren't rushing. We'd stop now and then to sip water or point out a weird-shaped tree. It felt peaceful, like one of those days where nothing could go wrong. Then, around midday, we decided to veer off the main trail. We'd heard about this narrow canyon that was supposed to have some cool rock formations, and we figured why not check it out. The path got steeper, and the trees closed in around us, making it feel darker, even though it was still daytime. That's when the smell hit us. At first, it was just a whiff, something sour in the air, but within seconds it got stronger. A nauseating mix of decay and rot, like something had died and been left out too long. But there was something else underneath it. This musky, almost animal scent that made my eyes water. Jason stopped dead in his tracks and turned to me, his face scrunched up. "What the hell is that?" he said, his voice low. I shook my head, my stomach churning. We both stood there for a minute, just breathing through our mouths, trying not to gag. Curiosity got the better of us, though. We're not the kind of guys to back down from something weird, so we decided to follow the smell. It led us downhill, into this denser part of the forest, where the ground was muddy from recent rains. That's when we saw the footprints. They were huge, way bigger than any bear or human print I'd ever seen. Each one was about 17 inches long, with deep impressions in the mud, spaced far apart, like whatever made them was taking massive strides. I remember kneeling down to get a closer look, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The prints were fresh, the edges still sharp, and they headed toward a cluster of trees up ahead. Jason pointed silently, and we both knew we had to see where they led. The smell got even worse as we moved forward, that rotten stench clinging to the air like a fog. Then we heard it, a low tearing sound like fabric ripping, but wetter. It sent a chill down my spine. We slowed down, stepping carefully over roots and rocks, our boots sinking into the soft ground. The sounds were coming from a clearing just ahead, and as we got closer, I could make out the shape of something large and dark, crouched over what looked like a dead animal. My breath caught in my throat. We crept closer, using the trees for cover, and that's when I saw it clearly. A massive, hair-covered creature, its back to us, tearing into an elk carcass with its hands. I'll never forget the way it looked. Its hair was dark and matted, tangled with dirt and leaves, and it moved with a slow, deliberate strength. Its hands, they were huge with thick fingers, ripped chunks of flesh from the elk, and I could hear the grinding of its jaw as it chewed. The air was thick with the coppery smell of blood, mixed with that awful rot. Jason grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin, and I could feel him trembling. We were both frozen, just watching, our minds trying to process what we were seeing. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't use their hands like that, and they're not that tall. This thing was crouched, but even then I could tell it was bigger than any animal I'd ever encountered. Then it turned its head. Slowly, like it had known we were there all along. Its eyes were deep set and dark, almost black, and they locked onto us with this expressionless stare that made my blood run cold. Time seemed to stop. I could see every detail, the way its hair framed its face, the broad nose, the lips pulled back slightly as if it was snarling without making a sound. Then it rose to its full height, and I swear it had to be over 7 feet tall. Its shoulders were massive, and it let out this low grunt that vibrated through the air, a sound that felt like it was coming from deep inside the earth. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. That's when it charged. No warning, no roar, just this sudden, powerful movement toward us. We didn't even think. We just turned and ran, uphill, back the way we came, stumbling over roots and rocks, our legs burning with effort. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, thudding against the ground, and more grunts, low and guttural. The foul odor followed us, clinging to the air like a curse. I remember tripping on a root and nearly falling, but Jason yanked me up, his face pale with terror. We didn't look back, we just kept running, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, made me flinch, expecting to feel its hands on me at any second. Somehow, we made it back to the truck. I don't even know how long it took. It felt like hours, but it was probably only minutes. We scrambled inside, locking the doors, both of us drenched in sweat and shaking so bad we could barely speak. I started the engine and peeled out of there, driving way too fast down the dirt road, not caring about the bumps or the dust cloud behind us. We didn't say much on the drive back, just stared ahead, trying to catch our breath. My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel, and I could still smell that stench in my nose, like it had seeped into my clothes. When we got home, we both sat in silence for a while, just processing what had happened. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, maybe we imagined it, but we knew deep down that it wasn't. Bears don't have eyes like that, and they don't stand up and charge like that. A few days later, we went back with another friend, someone who's a skeptic, to see if we could find any evidence. The elk carcass was gone, completely. All that was left were some blood stains on the ground, and more of those large footprints, spaced out like before. The smell was still there, faint but unmistakable, hanging in the air like a ghost. We didn't stay long, just looked around and got out of there. To this day, I can't explain what we saw. Jason and I never went back to that part of the forest, and we don't talk about it much, but sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night from a nightmare, seeing those deep-set eyes staring back at me. The whole thing left me with this chill that never really went away, like I caught a glimpse of something that wasn't meant to be seen. And every time I smell something rotten, even if it's just trash or decay, my heart starts racing all over again. I don't know what it was, but I know it was real. And I know it's still out there, in that vast, untouched wilderness, waiting. Story 8. I'm Shannon Morgan, and I live out near Dryad in Lewis County, Washington. I've driven River Road more times than I can count, but what happened in January of 1997 is something I still can't wrap my head around. I'm sharing this because I need to get it out, and maybe someone else has felt this kind of fear. It was a Tuesday, I think, because I remember coming back from a late shift at the diner where I work. The days blend together sometimes, but that one sticks out like a sore thumb. It had been drizzling on and off all day, and by the time I got in my car to head home, it was fully dark. Not just night dark, but that deep, woodsy dark that swallows everything up. My headlights cut through the rain, but they never felt strong enough out there. River Road twists and turns alongside the Chehalis River, and the trees press in so close, it's like they're leaning over you. I've always loved the quiet out here, but after what happened in '96, that quiet started feeling heavy, like something was waiting in it. That evening I was tired, my feet ached from being on them all day, and I just wanted to get home, maybe heat up some soup and watch TV until I fell asleep. I turned onto River Road a little after 6 o'clock, and the first thing I noticed was how still everything was. No wind, no animals rustling, just the hum of my car engine and the swish of my wipers. I had the heat on low, but I remember my hands were cold on the steering wheel, and I kept flexing my fingers to keep them from cramping. I'd been driving for about 10 minutes when I saw something move off to the right, near the tree line. My heart jumped into my throat right away. After the first time I saw one of those things in '96, and then again with my daughter in November, I'd gotten paranoid. Every shadow looked like it could be something, but this felt different. It wasn't a deer or a raccoon. It was bigger, and it moved upright. I slowed down a little, my eyes glued to the spot where I'd seen it. The headlights lit up the wet asphalt and the ferns crowding the roadside, but beyond that, it was just blackness. Then I saw it again. This time it was closer to the road, maybe 20 feet ahead on the right, a tall, dark shape standing just at the edge of the trees. I eased off the gas, my foot hovering over the brake. My mind was racing, telling me it was just a stump or a trick of the light, but my gut knew better. I'd seen this before. The first one had dirty white fur and a pink face, and it stood there watching me like it was curious. The second one, the one that looked at my daughter, had a loping walk that made my skin crawl, but this was new. As I got closer, the headlights caught it full on, and I swear my blood went cold. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and covered in black fur that looked matted and wet from the rain. But what got me were the eyes. They were red, not like devil red or anything cartoonish, but this eerie glowing red that seemed to pulse in the dark. It was standing perfectly still facing the road, and its shoulders were broad and human-like, but everything else was wrong. Its arms hung down long, and its posture was straight, like a person, but bulkier, more animal. I stopped the car. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because I was frozen, or maybe because some part of me needed to see if it was real. The engine idled, and the wipers kept swishing, but I couldn't hear anything else over the pounding in my chest. My breath fogged up the windshield a little, and I had to wipe it with my sleeve to keep looking. It was still there, just staring at my car, not moving, not making a sound. The red eyes didn't blink, they just held mine, and I felt this deep primal fear sink into my bones. It was like being looked at by something that knew exactly what I was, and I was nothing to it. I thought about my daughter, how scared she'd been when that other one turned its head and looked right at her. She didn't sleep well for weeks after that, and I'd lie awake listening for noises outside. Now, sitting there alone, I felt that same terror, but amplified. My hands started shaking so bad I had to grip the wheel tighter. I could feel sweat on my back, even though the car was cool, and my mouth went dry. I kept thinking, what if it comes closer? What if it moves? For what felt like forever, we just stayed like that. Me in the car, it by the trees. The rain picked up a little, drumming on the roof, and I saw the fur on its arms glisten where the water hit it. Its face was dark, but I could make out a blunt, almost flat nose and a heavy brow. The red eyes seemed to burn into me, and I got this crazy thought that it was reading my mind, that it knew I was afraid. I've never believed in monsters or ghosts, but out there, in that moment, it felt like I was facing something ancient and wild, something that didn't belong in my world. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a minute, maybe 5, but then it slowly turned its head, just a little, like it was listening to something in the woods behind it. The movement was smooth, not jerky like an animal, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. I held my breath, waiting for it to do something else. Part of me wanted to drive away, to floor it and never look back, but I was rooted to the spot. My car was old, a beat-up sedan that rattled on a good day, and I worried that if I moved too fast, it might startle whatever this was into chasing me. Then, without any warning, it took a step forward, not toward me, but parallel to the road, like it was going to cross. Its legs moved in this long, effortless stride, and I saw how its feet sank into the muddy ground. It was close enough now that I could see details. I wish I hadn't. The way its fur was patchy in places, showing dark skin underneath, and how its hands were huge, with fingers that curled slightly. The red eyes never left my car, even as it moved. It was like it was keeping me in its sight, making sure I knew it was there. My heart was hammering so hard, I thought it might burst. I finally got my foot on the gas, but I didn't press down yet. I was too scared to make a sound. The creature took another step, and then another, until it was standing right on the edge of the road, maybe 10 feet from my car. The headlights illuminated it fully now, and I could see how massive it was, broad-chested and solid, like it weighed hundreds of pounds. The rain dripped off its fur, and I caught a whiff of something, a musky, earthy smell that seeped in through the vents. It reminded me of wet dog and dirt, but stronger, more pungent. It stopped again and tilted its head, almost like it was curious. The red eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw its chest move as it breathed. I was shaking all over, and I could feel tears welling up because I was so terrified. I thought about honking the horn, but what if that made it angry? What if it charged? I'd heard stories about these things, but I never imagined I'd be close enough to see one like this. The other times, they were farther away. But this one was right there, within spitting distance. I don't know what came over me, but I slowly reached for the door lock, my hand trembling so much I fumbled with the button. The click sounded loud in the quiet, and the creature's head snapped toward the noise. Its eyes seemed to glow brighter, and for a second, I thought it was going to come at me. I held my breath, my hand frozen on the lock, but it didn't move. It just stood there watching me, and then it let out this low sound. Not a growl, more like a deep hum that vibrated through the car. I felt it in my teeth, this low rumble that made the air feel thick. That's when I lost it. I slammed my foot on the gas, and the car lurched forward. The tires spun on the wet road, and for a horrible second I thought I'd skid into the ditch, but I kept control, and as I sped up I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature was still there, standing in the middle of the road now, its red eyes fixed on my taillights. It didn't chase me, it just watched as I drove away, getting smaller and smaller until the curve of the road hid it from view. I didn't slow down until I reached my driveway, my heart still racing, my hands slick with sweat. I parked the car and sat there for a long time, just shaking and trying to catch my breath. The rain had let up, and the woods around my house were silent again, but I couldn't bring myself to get out. I kept expecting to see those red eyes in the trees, waiting for me. When I finally went inside, I locked the door and checked all the windows. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the couch with all the lights on, jumping at every little noise. The image of that thing is burned into my brain, the way it stood there, so calm and so terrifying. I've driven River Road every day since, and I'm always hyper-aware, always scanning the sides for movement, but I haven't seen it again. Part of me is relieved, but part of me wonders if it's still out there, watching, following the river like the others. I can't explain what it was, and I don't think I ever will. All I know is that I'm not alone in these woods, and that thought haunts me every time the sun goes down. Story 9. My hiking partner and we'd planned this trip for months. We're both experienced, or at least we thought we were. We've done plenty of backpacking in the lower 48. But Alaska is a whole different animal. The scale of everything is just bigger. The mountains are bigger, the trees are bigger, the silence is bigger. We'd gotten a later start than we wanted from the trailhead that day. Just little things, you know. A strap on my pack broke and we had to fix it. Then we realized we'd miscalculated the weight distribution of our food canisters. Dumb stuff. The kind of stuff that just eats up minutes and then suddenly it's hours. So by the time we found a spot to camp, the sun was already dipping behind the peaks, and that deep, purple Alaskan twilight was settling in. It was cold. The kind of cold that seeps right through your layers and sits in your bones. We were tired, grumpy, and just wanted to get the tent up and food in our bellies. We found this small clearing just a little off the main trail. It wasn't ideal. The ground was a bit sloped, and it was surrounded by these dense, dark spruce trees, but it was flat enough, and we were out of options. We set up the tent in that hurried, quiet way you do when you're exhausted and the light is fading. Every sound we made, the rustle of the tent fabric, the clink of the poles, it all seemed too loud in that huge quiet. We got a small camp stove going and heated up some dehydrated chili. We ate it sitting on a log, not talking much, just shoveling the warm food into our mouths, watching our breath puff out in little clouds. The tree line was maybe 30-40 feet away from us, just a solid wall of blackness. After we ate, I needed a smoke. I know, it's a terrible habit, especially out in the wilderness, but it's my one vice. My partner hates it, so I always walk away from camp to do it. I told them I was just going to head over near the trail, and they just grunted, already starting to clean up the cookware. I walked to the edge of the clearing where it met the trail. The trail wasn't much, just a narrow footpath beaten into the moss and dirt. I remember leaning against a tree, fumbling in my pocket for my cigarettes and lighter. My fingers were so cold they were clumsy. I finally got one lit, took that first deep drag, and felt the nicotine hit my system, a little wave of artificial calm. It was while I was standing there, looking down the trail, that I saw it. At first, my brain just did what brains do. It tried to make sense of the unfamiliar by fitting it into a familiar box. Down the trail, maybe a couple hundred yards away where the path curved, I saw what I honestly thought was a man on a bicycle. It was a weird thing to see, way the hell out there, but my tired mind just went, okay, a guy on a bike. It was a dark, upright shape, and the way it was positioned, it looked like someone gripping handlebars, leaning forward a bit. The legs were wide apart, like they were planted on either side of a bike frame. I remember feeling a flicker of annoyance. Who the hell is biking out here in the dark? And then a little bit of unease. It's not exactly normal to run into people in a place like that, at that hour. I took another drag off my cigarette, squinting, trying to get a better look. The light was terrible, just the last bruised remnants of twilight. But as I focused, the picture in my head just shattered. There was no bicycle. The shape wasn't leaning over handlebars. It was just standing there upright, and it was massive. I mean, the sheer bulk of it was wrong. It was tall, way taller than a man, and built like a goddamn refrigerator. Its legs were wide apart, but it wasn't straddling anything. It was just its stance, a powerful, wide-legged stance, like it was rooted to the ground. It was covered in dark hair or fur, just a silhouette of pure, solid black against the slightly less black of the forest behind it. My breath caught in my throat. The cigarette almost fell from my fingers. This wasn't a man. This wasn't anything I had ever seen before. It was just this thing, standing on the trail, and it was looking right at me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew. I felt it. The air just got heavier, like the pressure drops before a storm. My heart started thudding, a hard, painful rhythm in my chest. I couldn't move. I was frozen to the spot, just staring at this dark giant standing in the middle of the trail. It was so still, unnaturally still. The forest around us was silent. No wind, no birds, no rustling of little animals. It was a dead silence. the kind of silence that feels like it's pressing in on your eardrums. I don't know how long we stood like that, me and this thing, just locked in that silent stare down. It might have been 5 seconds. It might have been a minute. Time got weird. Then my survival instincts finally kicked in, screaming at me that I was alone and exposed. I tore my eyes away from it and stumbled back a few steps towards camp. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice cracking and too high-pitched. "Hey, get out here, now!" I heard my partner moving inside the tent, the sound of a zipper. "What? What is it?" they called out, their voice muffled and annoyed. "Just get out here!" "Look!" I shouted, not taking my eyes off the trail. I turned my head back, my neck stiff with terror, expecting it to still be there. It was gone. The trail was empty. My partner finally emerged from the tent, looking irritated. "What's your problem? You see a bear?" I was just pointing, my hand shaking uncontrollably. There was something on the trail. They shielded their eyes, peering into the darkness. "I don't see anything, Shannon. It's probably just a moose. You spooked it." "It wasn't a moose." The words came out as a desperate gasp. It was standing up, like a person, but huge. It was just standing there, and then I replayed the last second in my head. The moment between when I'd turned to call for help and when I'd looked back. It hadn't just run away. It hadn't crashed into the bushes. The movement was what made my blood run cold, colder than the Alaskan air. When it moved, it didn't run. It didn't even seem to exert itself. It just stepped. 2 steps, 2 unbelievably long, fluid steps. It went from the center of the trail to the deep shadows of the tree line in 2 silent, seamless motions. There was no sound, no crack of a twig, no rustle of leaves, no heavy footfall. Nothing. It moved with a speed and silence that was impossible for something that size. One moment it was there, a solid, hulking presence, and the next, it had been absorbed back into the forest without a trace. I tried to explain this to my partner, my words tumbling over each other. It took 2 steps, just 2, and it was in the trees. It didn't make a sound. Nothing. They looked at me like I was crazy. "You're tired, Shannon. It's dark. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. It was a bear, standing on its hind legs. You know they do that." I shook my head, a frantic, jerky motion. No, it wasn't. I know what I saw. But the doubt was already in their eyes, and that doubt started to poison me a little bit too. Had I imagined it? Was I that exhausted? We stood there for another 10 minutes, shining our headlamps down the trail. The beams of light just cut through the blackness, illuminating empty path and the impassive faces of the trees. There was nothing, no movement, no sound. The normal night noises were slowly starting to return. A faint chirp of a cricket, the sigh of a light breeze through the spruce needles. It was as if the forest itself had been holding its breath and was now finally exhaling. We went back to the tent. I was trembling all over, a fine, constant shake that I couldn't control. My partner tried to be reassuring, patting my shoulder, saying it was okay, it was just a big animal. But they didn't understand. They didn't see its posture. They didn't feel the intelligence in that stare. They didn't witness the way it moved. That wasn't an animal startled by a human. That was something observing, and then deciding to leave on its own terms. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. I lay in my sleeping bag, curled into a tight ball, listening to every single sound the forest made. Every snap of a twig was it coming back. Every rustle of leaves was it circling the tent. The darkness inside the tent felt suffocating. I kept replaying the image over and over in my head. The dark, bulky shape, the wide-legged stance, the effortless, silent retreat. The terror wasn't just from seeing it. It was from the way it violated everything I thought I knew about the world. Things that big don't move that quietly. They don't just vanish. When the first grey light of dawn finally filtered through the tent fabric, it was the biggest relief of my life. I was out of that bag and out of the tent before my partner even stirred. The world looked normal again. Mist was rising from the damp ground. Birds were singing. It felt safe. As soon as my partner was up, I insisted we go look. I had to find something, some proof, some track, anything that would validate what I'd seen and prove I wasn't losing my mind. We went to the spot on the trail where it had been standing. The ground was firm there, a mix of hard-packed dirt and old, resilient moss. We got on our hands and knees, scanning every inch. Nothing, not a single footprint, not a broken branch, not a disturbed leaf. It was as if it had never been there at all. We pushed into the trees where it had disappeared. The undergrowth was thick, a carpet of dead needles and low bushes. We searched for what felt like an hour, our hope dwindling with every passing minute. There was no path, no sign of passage, no hair caught on bark. Nothing. And that was the moment the real, deep-down horror set in. Not the heart-pounding fear of the night before, but a cold, sinking dread that has settled in my gut and hasn't left. I saw something. Something massive. Something that moved in a way that shouldn't be possible, and it left no trace. It was just gone. We packed up our camp in a hurry and got the hell out of there. We hiked the entire way back to the car without stopping for more than a minute or two. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. The feeling of being watched so intense, it was like a physical weight on my back. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. I've read other accounts online, stories from other people in places like this. I know what they call it. I know what people would say I saw. But putting a name to it doesn't make it any less terrifying. It doesn't explain how something that big could be so silent, so ghost-like. It doesn't explain why it was just standing there, watching me. I went into those woods thinking I understood the rules. I thought I knew what was out there. I was wrong. There's something else in those deep, dark woods, something that can watch you from the shadows and then disappear without a sound. And I saw it. I know I did. I just don't know what to do with that knowledge now. It's just there, inside me, this cold, hard knot of fear that I can't untie. I was smoking a cigarette, and I saw a man on a bike that wasn't a man, and then it was gone, and I've never felt so small or so scared in my entire life. That's it. That's what happened. Story 10. That day I was out by the new horse pasture. We'd just finished clearing a good chunk of land the year before to build it, along with a decent-sized barn. It was my chore to feed the horses in the afternoons after school. I didn't mind it. Actually, I loved it. It was peaceful. The smell of hay and horse, the sound of their quiet chuffing, the way the late sun came through the tall pines at the edge of the clearing. It was my favorite place to be. I remember the specifics so clearly because it was a Tuesday. I'd had a math test that morning. I was pretty sure I'd bombed, and the quiet of the pasture was a relief. I was wearing an old grey t-shirt and jeans, and my sneakers were covered in a fine layer of the sandy red dirt that's everywhere around here. I'd just dumped the grain into the troughs. Our two horses, Duke and Daisy, were ambling over, their big heads dipping down to eat. I was just standing there, leaning against the wooden fence post, watching them. The fence was a 4-board wooden one, strong, built to keep the horses in and, I guess we assumed, anything else out. Beyond it, the woods were a solid wall of green, shadows already starting to stretch long as the afternoon wore on. My mum was probably inside making dinner. My sister was at a friend's house. My stepdad wasn't home from work yet. It was just me, the horses, and the buzz of late summer insects. That's when the feeling started to creep in. It's hard to describe, but the woods got quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but a dead quiet. The insects just stopped. All of them. One moment there was that constant humming background noise, and the next there was nothing. It was so sudden it was like a switch had been flipped. I remember feeling a little prickle on the back of my neck, but I shrugged it off. Maybe a storm was coming. Then Daisy, the more skittish of the two, lifted her head. Her ears went flat against her skull. She let out this sharp, nervous snort and took a quick step back from the trough. Duke did the same a second later, but he was bigger, more stubborn. He didn't back away, but he stopped eating and his whole body went rigid. He was staring past me, past the fence, into the tree line. I turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything, just the usual tangle of underbrush. Kudzu, saw palmetto, young pines. My eyes scanned over it, and then they snagged on something that wasn't right. There was a shape there, maybe 30 yards into the woods, half hidden behind a thicket of brush. It was tall, really tall, and it was just standing there. My first stupid thought was that it was Duke, that he'd somehow gotten out and was standing in the woods, because the color, it had this reddish auburn hair, almost the exact same shade as Duke's coat when the sun hit it right. It was just standing upright, perfectly still. But the proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long, the arms were hanging down, and they were too long too. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 1.5 feet taller than me, maybe more. It was built thick, like a power lifter, but covered in that long, shaggy, reddish hair. My brain was trying to make it into something I knew. A bear. But bears don't stand straight up like that, not for that long. And they're black or brown around here. Not that coppery red, and the sheer size of it was wrong. This was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen on TV or in books. I was frozen. I couldn't move my feet. I just stood there, leaning on that fence post, my hand gripping the weathered wood so hard I could feel splinters digging into my palm. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until my lungs started to burn. I took a shallow, shaky breath. That's when I heard a noise from the barn, a frantic, panicked stamping, and then Duke, the real Duke, came barreling out of the barn door, his eyes wide and white-rimmed with terror. He didn't even look at me. He just galloped straight to the far corner of the pasture, as far from the woods as he could get, and stood there trembling. The reality of what I was seeing hit me like a physical blow. My stomach dropped. That thing in the woods wasn't my horse. It was something else, something that had scared my horses so badly they'd abandoned their food. My eyes snapped back to it. It was still there, and it moved. It wasn't a big movement. It just shifted its weight from one foot to the other. It was a slow, deliberate motion. I saw the muscles in its shoulder and back bunch under that matted hair. The movement was so human-like, so fluid, but on a scale that was just monstrous. Then it made a sound. It was a low, deep grunt. Not like a pig. Deeper than that, it came from its chest, a resonant, guttural noise that I didn't just hear with my ears. I felt it in my own chest, a vibration in the air between us. It was a sound of pure, raw power. And then it turned its head. I saw its face, or I didn't really see features, not clearly from that distance and through the brush. It was shadowed, but I saw its eyes. They caught a sliver of the fading light, and they weren't animal eyes. They weren't blank or stupid. They were intelligent. They were looking right at me, not at the horses, not at the pasture, at me. It knew I was there. It knew I was watching it. That gaze locked onto mine, and a coldness washed over me that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a deep, primal fear, the kind that lives in your spine and your guts. It was the fear of being prey. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack them. My legs felt like water. Every hair on my arms and neck was standing straight up. We stood like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few seconds. Me, a 17-year-old kid, frozen solid against a fence post, and this thing staring at me from the shadows of the woods I thought I knew. Then it moved again. It turned its whole body away from me, back towards the deep woods. It didn't run. It took a step, a huge ground-eating stride, and then another, and then it was moving, crashing through the undergrowth. The sound was unbelievable. It wasn't just the rustle of leaves. It was the sound of things breaking. Small trees, saplings as thick as my wrist. They didn't just bend out of its way, they snapped. I heard them crack like gunshots, one after another, as it plowed through them without even slowing down. The force it would take to do that. It was unimaginable. The sound of its passage faded quickly, swallowed by the forest, but those sharp, snapping cracks echoed in my head. The spell was broken. The second it was gone, the ability to move flooded back into my body, fueled by pure, unthinking terror. I didn't look back. I didn't check on the horses. I just ran. I vaulted over the pasture fence, not even using the gate, and sprinted for the house. My sneakers slipped in the dirt. I stumbled, caught myself with my hands, scrambled back up and kept running. The back door seemed a mile away. I could hear my own gasping breaths, ragged and loud in the silence. The woods were still quiet. The insects hadn't started back up. I slammed through the back door into the kitchen, my chest heaving. I skidded on the linoleum and had to grab the counter to stop myself. My mum was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She turned, startled. "What in the world is wrong with you? You're white as a sheet." I tried to talk, but the words came out in a jumble. In the woods, there was a thing. It was huge. The horses. She put the spoon down and came over, her face shifting from annoyance to concern. "Slow down. What thing, a bear?" I shook my head, my whole body trembling now. Number. Not a bear. It was standing up. It was tall. It had red hair. It looked at me. My stepdad had come into the kitchen, drawn by the noise. He was still in his work clothes. "What's all the yelling about?" "My son says he saw a monster in the woods," my mom said, her voice taking on that gentle, patronizing tone she used when she thought I was being dramatic. I felt a hot flush of frustration mixed with the cold fear. It wasn't a monster. It was real. It snapped trees. It grunted at me. My stepdad chuckled, a short, dismissive sound. "Probably just a big old buck, son. Your imagination gets the best of you out in those woods. You and your friends were always coming up with stories about that hole and whatnot." This wasn't a story. It looked right at me. My voice was rising, getting shrill. I could hear the panic in it, and I hated it. Okay, my mom said, patting my shoulder. "You just got spooked. It's getting dark. It's easy to see things." She looked at my stepdad. "The horses are probably just spooked by a bobcat or something. They didn't get it. They weren't there. They didn't feel that silence. They didn't see those eyes. They didn't hear the sound of trees breaking like twigs." The more I tried to explain, the crazier I sounded, even to myself. The concrete details, the reddish auburn hair exactly like Duke's, the way it shifted its weight, the deep chest grunt, the intelligent stare, they just melted into the vague category of kid sees something scary in the woods. The conversation ended with my stepdad saying he'd take a look around the fence line tomorrow, but his tone said he wouldn't find anything, and he didn't expect to. My mom made me sit down and drink a glass of water. The subject was closed. That was the worst part. The isolation. The feeling that this huge, terrifying, world-shifting thing had happened to me, and I was the only one who carried it. I went up to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, still shaking. I could still feel the imprint of its gaze on me, a cold spot right between my shoulder blades. I looked out my window, which faced the back of the property. The woods were just a dark smear against the twilight sky. They weren't my woods anymore. They were its woods. I never went back out to the pasture alone at dusk again. I started paying attention to the noises at night in a way I never had before. Every crack of a branch, every call of an owl made my heart jump. The idyllic peace of our property was gone, replaced by a constant low-level hum of dread. I never saw it again. But I know what I saw that Tuesday afternoon. I know it was real, and I know with a certainty that chills me to this day that it saw me too. It knew I was there. And in that moment, we looked at each other. Something passed between us, something old and wild and terrifying, and I've never been able to explain it to anyone, not really. I just have to live with it. Story 11. It was June 6th, 2013. I remember the date because it was the first day of a 5-day rafting trip down the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho. It's this unbelievably beautiful, rugged place. Towering canyon walls, pine trees everywhere, water so clear and cold it hurts to touch. We'd put in that morning, a group of 8 of us, and by late afternoon we'd made camp at a spot called Scout Camp, right around River Mile 12.7. The day had been perfect, sunny but not too hot, the kind of weather you dream about. We'd set up our tents, had a big dinner of pasta and sausage cooked over the fire, and everyone was in a great mood. After we ate, most of the group decided to hike up to Sheep-Eater Hot Springs. It was supposed to be a mile or so up the trail, a natural hot pool. I'd volunteered to stay back and finish cleaning the dishes. I didn't mind. I like a little quiet time, and the light was starting to get that soft golden quality that makes everything look painted. So I scrubbed the pots and plates in the river, the cold water numbing my fingers. I packed everything away into the bear-proof containers, wiped down the camp table, and just stood there for a minute, listening to the river. It's a constant sound, that river, a low, powerful rush that fills the whole canyon. It's comforting normally. By the time I was done, the sun was well down behind the canyon rim. It wasn't full dark yet, but the deep shadows were pooling in the trees, and the air had a real chill to it. I grabbed my headlamp, clicked it on to test the batteries, and started up the trail after the others. The trail from Scout Camp to the hot springs isn't super tough, but it's not a sidewalk either. It climbs up away from the river, winding through dense stands of pine and fir. The ground is soft with needles, and there are roots and rocks to watch out for. My headlamp cut a bobbing white circle in the growing dark, illuminating the path just a few feet ahead of me. Beyond that circle, the world was a wall of blackness. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes, just settling into a rhythm, when I heard it, a sharp crack from the slope above me to my left. Not a twig snapping underfoot. This was louder, sharper, like a thick branch being broken over a knee. It echoed for a second in the quiet. I stopped dead. My heart did a little jump in my chest. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small and stupid, swallowed by the trees. I figured it was probably one of the guys from my group, maybe coming back to check on me or playing a prank. I stood there listening, but all I could hear was the distant, muffled rush of the river far below. No voices, no footsteps crunching on the forest floor. Nothing. I shrugged it off, or tried to. Probably a falling branch, I told myself. It happens. I started walking again. A little faster now. The trail felt narrower. The darkness beyond my headlamp beam felt thicker. Then a rock landed about 10 feet to my right. It didn't just fall, it landed. It hit the soft ground with a solid, distinct thump and bounced once before coming to rest. It was about the size of my fist. My brain scrambled for an explanation. A rock fall? But it came from the side, from the same slope where I'd heard the crack. Not from the cliff face above the trail, and it was just the one rock. I froze again, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't right. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice tighter this time. "Who's there? Not funny!" Silence. A heavy, waiting silence. The air felt still, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I swung my headlamp beam up towards the slope. It was steep, covered in trees and thick undergrowth. The light just hit the first line of tree trunks, their bark looking pale and ghostly, and then it was swallowed by the impenetrable blackness between them. I couldn't see anything moving, no flash of a jacket, no grinning face. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. My heart was hammering against my ribs now, a frantic, panicked rhythm. This is it, I thought. This is the part in the story where the idiot keeps walking. Thwack. Another rock. This one was closer. It landed maybe 5 feet directly in front of me, kicking up a little spray of dirt and pine needles. This one had a clear trajectory. It wasn't a random tumble. It was thrown. It had an arc. Someone or something had pitched it with intention, with aim. The fear that went through me then, was a cold, physical thing. It started in my gut, a hard knot of ice, and shot out to my fingers and toes, leaving them tingling and numb. This wasn't a prank. No one from my group would do this. They wouldn't risk hitting me with a rock. Not in the dark. Not out here. And if it was another person, why weren't they saying anything? Why were they hiding? I stood there, rooted to the spot, my headlamp beam shaking because my whole body was starting to tremble. I stared into the blackness on that slope, my eyes straining, trying to see past the tiny circle of light. I was looking for a shape, a shadow, anything, but there was nothing, just the silent, watchful trees, and that's when the feeling hit me. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was a sensation, a primal, deep-in-your-bones knowing. I was being watched, not just glanced at, but studied, observed by something that was staying perfectly, utterly still in the darkness. The air felt thick, oppressive, like it was pushing down on me. The normal night sounds, the crickets, the slight rustle of the breeze, were gone. It was just me, the thumping of my own heart in my ears, and that heavy, predatory silence. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like wood. What if I ran and it gave chase? What if it was faster? What was it? My brain, trying to find a box to put this in, skittered through possibilities. A bear. Bears don't throw rocks. A mountain lion. They stalk, but they don't play games like this. A person, a sick, twisted person hiding in the woods. Maybe, but the silence was wrong. A person makes noise. They breathe heavy. They shift their weight. They snap a twig. This thing, whatever it was, made no sound at all. I forced my legs to move. I didn't run, not at first. I walked fast, my boots scuffing on the trail, my head on a swivel, constantly looking back over my shoulder, shining my light into the empty darkness behind me. Every shadow looked like a crouching form. Every rustle of a leaf, had the wind started up again, made me flinch. I could feel eyes on my back, a crawling sensation between my shoulder blades. I was convinced that at any second, another rock would come flying out of the dark, this time hitting me in the head. The mile to the hot springs felt like 10. Every second stretched out, filled with that awful, waiting terror. I was sweating despite the cool air, my shirt sticking to my back, my mouth was dry as dust. Finally, I saw the warm, orange glow of a campfire through the trees and heard the muffled sound of laughter and voices. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees almost buckled. I stumbled into the clearing by the hot springs, my chest heaving. The steam from the pool rose into the night air, and my friends were all there, sitting on rocks, soaking in the water, their faces lit by the fire. "Hey, you made it," one of them said. "What took you so long?" I must have looked a mess, pale, wide-eyed, breathing hard. I tried to play it cool, I really did. I forced a smile that felt like a crack in my face. Nothing, just took my time. I sat down on a log near the fire, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them between my knees. The warm, cheerful atmosphere of the camp felt alien and fragile, like a soap bubble. I was safe here with people, but the memory of the trail was a cold hand around my heart. After a few minutes, when my breathing had mostly returned to normal, I casually asked, "Hey, did any of you guys come back down the trail, like maybe to mess with me?" They all looked at me like I was crazy. "What? No, man. We all came straight here." "Why?" My blood ran cold again, this time for a different reason, the confirmation I didn't want. "I heard some stuff," I mumbled, looking into the fire. "Sounded like someone was up on the slope, throwing rocks." They laughed. It was a good-natured laugh, the kind you give a friend who's spooking themselves. "Dude, it was probably just a squirrel dropping a pine cone or something, or a deer. This place is full of animals." "A deer that throws rocks?" I said, but it came out weak. I didn't have the energy to argue, and I knew how it sounded. I knew if I pressed it, I'd just become that guy, the one who got spooked in the woods and saw a monster behind every tree. So I dropped it. I shut my mouth, and I never brought it up again for the rest of the trip. I got in the hot springs, I let the warm water soak into my tense muscles, but I couldn't relax. I kept looking past the circle of firelight into the dark tree line surrounding the clearing. The feeling of being watched hadn't entirely gone away. It had just followed me here, lurking at the edge of the light. The rest of the rafting trip was fine, on the surface. The days were sunny, the rapids were fun, the scenery was stunning. But for me, something had shifted. The beauty of the place now had a sharp, sinister edge. Every time we set up camp, my eyes would automatically scan the tree line. Every strange noise at night, every crack of a branch would jolt me awake, my heart racing. The wilderness didn't feel wild and free anymore, it felt occupied. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since then. A person, maybe. But the silence, the accuracy of the throws, the feeling of being stalked by something that knew how to use the terrain to stay completely hidden. It doesn't fit. I've read stories, you know, the ones people talk about in places like this. About things that live in the deep woods. Things that are strong and smart and don't want to be seen. I never gave those stories much credit before. I was a skeptic. I'm not anymore. What gets me, what really stays with me and chills me to the bone, isn't just the rocks. It was the intelligence behind them. The first one was a warning, like I see you. The second one was closer, more precise, like I can hit you if I want to. It was a demonstration of power and control, and the silence, that absolute, unnerving silence. It wasn't the silence of an animal. It was the silence of something that was choosing not to make a sound. I never saw it. I never heard it breathe or move. All I have is the memory of those two rocks landing in the dirt, the echo of that single crack, and the crushing, undeniable feeling that something was standing just beyond the reach of my light, watching me, and deciding to let me go, and I have no idea why. Story 12. It was a Sunday, and I'd been up in Mammoth with some friends for a couple of days. We'd gone skiing, had a few beers, the usual. I had to be back in Los Angeles for work early Monday morning, so I decided to drive back late to avoid traffic. I left Mammoth around midnight, and the drive was pretty quiet. Just me, my car, and the dark, empty roads. I remember the air was cold, like really cold, and I had the heater on full blast. The sky was clear, no moon, so it was pitch black except for my headlights cutting through the darkness. I was tired but not exhausted. I'd had a coffee before leaving, so I was alert enough. As I got closer to the area around Snow Creek Golf Course, it must have been around 2:30 in the morning. I know that because I'd just checked the clock on my dashboard, thinking I'd make it home by 4 or so if I kept going. The road there is kind of winding, with open fields on one side and hills on the other. It's isolated, no streetlights, just the occasional sign for the golf course or a ranch. I was driving at a steady pace, maybe 55 miles an hour, not too fast because of the curves. My music was playing softly, some indie rock playlist, but I turned it down a bit because the silence outside felt heavier than usual. Not spooky, just quiet, like the whole world was asleep. Then, as I came around a bend, my headlights swept across this open field to my right. It's not a manicured lawn or anything. It's rough, with patches of tall grass, some rocks, and it slopes down toward a dry creek bed. The ground was probably frozen. I could see a faint glint of frost in the light, and that's when I saw it. My headlights caught this massive figure, maybe 100 yards out, walking steadily across the field. I swear my breath just stuck in my throat. At first, I thought it was a bear or something, but no, it was upright, on 2 legs, and it was huge. I mean, way bigger than any person I've ever seen. It had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and its shoulders were broad, like a football player's, but scaled up. Its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees, and they were swinging in these wide, even arcs as it walked. The movement wasn't clumsy or shuffling, it was purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going. It took long, heavy strides, not running, but not slow either, more like an Olympic speed walker, but slower and with more weight behind it. Each step looked deliberate, like it was pushing through the rough terrain without any effort. I remember my hands tightening on the steering wheel, my knuckles going white. My heart started hammering in my chest, so loud I could hear it over the engine. I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead, and my mouth went dry. I slowed down almost without thinking, taking my foot off the gas until I was crawling along at maybe 20 miles an hour. I didn't stop, though. Hell no, I wasn't about to stop out there alone in the middle of the night. I just kept driving. But my eyes were glued to this thing. The weirdest part was that it didn't react to my headlights at all. I have bright LEDs, and they were shining right on it, lighting up the whole area. But it just kept its head forward, like it was focused on something ahead. I couldn't see its face clearly, it was too far away, but the silhouette was unmistakable. It was covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair or fur, matted and thick. The way it moved, it wasn't human. Humans don't walk like that, not in a freezing field in the dead of night. The ground was uneven and probably icy, but it was striding along like it was on a paved path. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a guy in a costume, but who would be out there at 2:30 in the morning, walking through a field in the cold, and the size, it was too big. Way too big, or a hoax, but it felt too real, too solid. Every step it took seemed to sink into the ground a little, like it had real weight. I could hear the crunch of frost under my tires, but over that, I imagined I could almost hear its footsteps, though that might have been my mind playing tricks. As I drove, the road started to curve away from the field, and my headlights began to pull off it. I remember leaning forward, squinting, trying to keep it in view for as long as possible. My chest felt tight, and I was breathing in shallow gasps. For a second, I thought about pulling over, getting out my phone to record or something, but fear just locked me in place. What if it noticed me? What if it turned and came toward the road? The thought made my skin crawl, so I kept driving, my eyes darting between the road and the field. Then, just like that, as the lights swung away, the figure vanished into the darkness. One moment it was there, clear as day under the beams, and the next, it was gone. The field was empty, just shadows and frost. I sped up without meaning to, my foot pressing down on the accelerator until I was doing 60, then 70. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the wheel harder to steady them. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it following me, but there was nothing. Just blackness. For the next hour or so, I drove like a maniac, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The image was burned into my brain. That huge, dark shape moving with such purpose, like it had somewhere to be. I started questioning myself. Was I hallucinating? Was I more tired than I thought? But I'd had that coffee, and I'd been fine until then. Plus, the details were too vivid. The way its arms swung, the steady rhythm of its steps, the sheer size of it, it wasn't something my brain would just make up. I remember pulling over at a gas station closer to LA, my hands still trembling as I filled up the tank. The attendant gave me a weird look, and I realized I must have been pale as a ghost. I didn't say anything to him, just paid and got back in the car. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept replaying it in my head, over and over. What was it? Where was it going? The premise said it was moving toward town, but town was miles away. Was it heading for the golf course? The hills? It didn't make sense. By the time I got home, the sun was starting to come up, and I felt exhausted but wired. I couldn't sleep. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall. I thought about calling someone, a friend, the police, but what would I say? Hey, I saw a big hairy thing in a field. They'd think I was crazy, so I kept it to myself, but it ate at me. I started reading up on Bigfoot sightings, something I'd never done before. I found stories online, on forums like this, and some of them described similar things. Upright figures, long arms, that purposeful walk. But reading about it isn't the same as seeing it with your own eyes. What really gets me is the clarity of it. I saw it under strong headlights from a relatively short distance. It wasn't a glimpse in the fog or a shadow in the trees. It was right there, in an open field, for a good 10 or 15 seconds, long enough to sear into my memory. I keep thinking about the cold. The field was freezing, probably below freezing, and it was just walking through it like it was nothing. No jacket, no nothing. And the way it didn't react to the lights. That's what creeps me out the most. It was like I wasn't even there, like it was in its own world. I've driven that route a couple of times since then, always during the day, and every time I pass that field, I get this knot in my stomach. I look for tracks or signs, but I've never seen anything. Part of me wants to go back at night with a camera, but I'm too scared. What if I see it again? Or worse, what if it sees me? I've always been a logical person, you know. I believe in science, in evidence, but this, I can't explain it. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, it wasn't a hoax. It was something else, something unknown. And that thought terrifies me. The world feels a little less safe now, a little more mysterious. I used to laugh at stories like this, but not anymore. Now, I get it. The fear is real. So yeah, that's what happened. I was just driving home, minding my own business, and I saw something that I can't forget. I don't know what it was, and I probably never will. All I know is that it was there, and it was real, and it shook me to my core. I still lie awake sometimes thinking about it, wondering if it's still out there, walking through those fields in the dark, and that's enough to keep me up at night. Story 13. That summer, my older brother had his own apartment in town, about 5 miles from our house. He was in his early 20s, working a job, and I'd go over there sometimes to watch TV or just get away from our parents. This particular night, I'd been at his place with my friend Brian. We'd spent the evening messing around, playing cards and listening to music, nothing out of the ordinary. Brian was my age, lived a few streets over, and we'd been buddies since we were little. When it got late, around 11 o'clock, we decided to head home. My brother offered to drive us, but we were stubborn. We had our bikes and we liked the independence. Plus, it was a warm night, and the ride wasn't bad. Or so we thought. The road from my brother's apartment to our neighborhood was mostly rural, a 2-lane blacktop with thick woods on either side. No streetlights, just the moon and our bike lights, which were those cheap, dim things you clip to the handlebars. The air was heavy with that summer humidity, the kind that makes your shirt stick to your back, and you could hear crickets chirping and the occasional rustle in the bushes. It was peaceful in a way, but also kind of eerie, because it was so dark and quiet out there. Brian and I were riding side by side, talking about dumb kid stuff, school, girls, whatever, and not really paying attention to much else. I was ahead of Brian by maybe 10 feet, just pedaling along, when something caught my eye up ahead. To the right of the road, there was this old wooden fence that separated the woods from a field, and beyond that, the trees were dense and shadowy. Suddenly, I saw this whitish shape moving fast, really fast, through the underbrush near the fence. It was tall, way taller than a person, and it was knocking branches out of the way like they were nothing. I mean, branches were snapping and flying, and you could hear this crashing sound over the hum of the crickets. My first thought was, that's a horse. It made sense because there were farms around there, and sometimes animals got loose. But even as I thought it, something felt off. Horses don't move that quick through thick cover, and this thing was blazing through it like it was on a mission. I slowed down my bike, my heart starting to pound. Brian must have noticed because he called out, "Hey, what's up?" I didn't answer right away. I was just staring at the spot where I'd seen it. The movement had stopped as suddenly as it started, and now there was just silence. Not even the crickets were chirping anymore, which was weird. It was like everything had gone dead quiet. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up, and my skin got all prickly. I remember my mouth going dry, and I had to swallow hard before I could say anything. "Did you see that?" I asked Brian, my voice coming out all shaky. He pulled up next to me, his bike creaking. "See what?" "I heard something like branches breaking." I pointed toward the fence. "Over there. Something big and white, moving real fast. I thought it was a horse, but..." Brian squinted into the darkness. "I don't see anything now. Maybe it was a deer or something, but it wasn't a deer. Deer are graceful, and they don't plow through bushes like that. This thing had been powerful, almost aggressive in how it moved. We stood there for a minute, not talking, just listening. The only sound was our breathing and the faint whir of our bike tires slowing down. Then, from deep in the woods, we heard this low grunt or growl. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, like something big was out there. It wasn't a sound I'd ever heard before, not from any animal I knew, not a dog, not a bear, nothing like that. It was guttural, almost human-like, but not quite. My stomach tightened and I felt this cold sweat break out on my forehead. Brian must have felt it too because he whispered, "Let's get out of here." We didn't need to say another word. We started pedaling again, faster this time, not looking back. I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead, but I could feel something watching us from the woods. It's hard to explain, but it was this intense sensation, like a pressure in the air, making the back of my neck tingle. Every little noise, a leaf rustling, a twig snapping, made me jump. My legs were burning from pedaling so hard, and my hands were slippery on the handlebars from sweat. We didn't talk much on the rest of the ride home. Every now and then, one of us would glance over our shoulder, but it was too dark to see anything. The moon was behind clouds part of the time, so the road was just a black ribbon, and the woods felt like a wall of shadows closing in. I remember thinking how long those 5 miles seemed. It felt like hours, even though it was probably only 20 minutes or so. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. A horse? No, horses aren't that fast in thick brush, and they're not usually white around here. Most of the horses in Pickens County are brown or black. And that sound, it didn't fit. When we finally got to my house, we both slammed our bikes down on the lawn and rushed inside. My parents were already in bed, so the house was quiet, but the lights were on in the living room. Brian and I collapsed on the couch, breathing heavy, not saying anything at first. Then he looked at me, his face pale, and said, "What the hell was that?" I shook my head. "I don't know, man. But it wasn't a horse." We sat there for a while, trying to calm down. I could still feel my heart thumping in my chest, and my hands were trembling a little. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it moved, the sound of branches breaking, that grunt. It was all so vivid. After a bit, Brian said he should head home, but he didn't want to ride alone. I walked him part way, and we made sure he got to his street okay. When I got back, I was too wired to sleep, so I went to the kitchen and got a glass of water. That's when I remembered my brother. He was still up, probably watching TV in his room. I decided to call him. This was back when we had landlines, so I dialed his number, and he picked up after a few rings. He sounded tired, but I blurted out everything that had happened. The whitish thing, the speed, the noise, the feeling of being watched. I didn't mention Bigfoot or anything like that because it seemed too crazy, but I told him I thought it might be something weird. There was a long pause on the other end, and then he said, "You know, I've seen stuff like that out there too." His voice was serious, not joking around like he usually did. He told me about a couple of times when he was driving home late and saw shadows moving in the woods, things that were too big to be people. Once, he said, he saw something tall and dark cross the road ahead of him, moving so fast it was just a blur. He never talked about it much because people would think he was nuts, but hearing my story brought it all back. That conversation made everything feel even more real and unsettling. Here was my brother, who I looked up to, confirming that strange things happened out there. It wasn't just my imagination. We talked for a few more minutes, and he said to be careful riding at night, maybe get a ride next time. After I hung up, I just sat there in the kitchen, staring at the wall. The clock on the stove said it was past midnight, but I wasn't tired at all. My mind was spinning with questions. What was that thing? Why was it white? Bigfoot is usually described as dark, so that didn't fit, but whatever it wasn't natural. I went up to my room and lay down on the bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made me tense up, and I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see something in the yard. The night felt different now, thicker, more menacing. I thought about Brian, probably lying awake too, and my brother's stories. It was like this secret world had opened up, one where the woods weren't just trees and animals, but something else entirely. The rest of the night dragged on, and I must have dozed off eventually, but when I woke up the next morning, it was the first thing on my mind. I went outside to get my bike, and the world looked normal, sunny, birds chirping, everything peaceful, but I couldn't shake that feeling from the night before. I kept looking toward the woods, half expecting to see that whitish shape again. Brian and I talked about it later, and we both agreed we'd never ride that road at night again without a good reason. Even now, all these years later, I can close my eyes and see it. That fast, pale thing moving through the trees, knocking branches aside like they were nothing. I've never been able to explain it, and I doubt I ever will. It's just one of those things that happened, and it left me with this deep, lingering unease, like there's more out there than we know. Story 14. It was one of those late summer days that just seems to stretch on forever. The kind you only get when you're a kid with no concept of time. I was 10 years old, spending a week at my grandmother's house in LaSalle County. Her property backed up against a thick woods, the kind that felt ancient even to a child, dark and deep and full of secrets. The backyard was huge, a sprawling green carpet that ended at a wall of trees. My main source of entertainment out there was this old metal slide. It was probably from the 60s, the paint chipped and faded, the metal hot enough to burn your legs if you sat on it for too long in the sun. That particular afternoon, I was out there by myself. The air was thick and humid, buzzing with insects. I remember the smell of cut grass and the distant, faint smell of whatever my grandma was cooking for dinner later. I was just playing, you know. Not a care in the world. Going down the slide, climbing back up the little ladder over and over, it was one of those repetitive, mindless activities that kids just lose themselves in. I was probably making up some little story in my head, pretending I was a space explorer or something. I was at the top of the slide, about to push off, when I heard it. It wasn't a loud sound. It was a rustling, but it was different from the usual squirrel or bird noises I was used to. This was heavier, a deliberate sort of crunching in the leaves and undergrowth. It came from the side of the slide, the part that was closest to the woods. I froze, my hands on the hot metal rails, and just listened. My heart, which had been thumping along at a normal kid rate, suddenly kicked up a notch. It wasn't fear yet, not really. It was more like a sharp, focused curiosity. What was that? Feeling. I slowly turned my head to look, and that's when I saw it. It was crouched down low, maybe 15-20 feet away, half hidden behind the big oak tree that stood sentinel near the slide. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of the shape. It was all wrong. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a person. It was a figure, covered in long, shaggy hair. The hair was a mix of colors, a deep brownish black like wet earth and old tree bark all matted together. It was peeking out from behind the tree, and its head was turned directly towards me. Its eyes, I will never ever forget its eyes. They were dark, a deep liquid brown, but they weren't animal eyes. There was an intelligence there, a curiosity. It was watching me with this intense, studying look, the way you might watch an interesting bug. It didn't feel threatening, it just felt observant. It was so still, just this hulking, hairy shape in the shadows, and I was frozen at the top of my slide, completely locked in place by its gaze. We must have stayed like that for a full minute, just looking at each other. The sounds of the backyard, the insects, the distant traffic, all just faded into a dull hum. My whole world had shrunk down to this one patch of grass, and this thing watching me from the trees. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, but I didn't dare move to wipe it away. I remember my fingers were starting to ache from gripping the slide's rails so tightly. Then everything happened at once. It must have realized that I had seen it, truly seen it, and that the spell was broken. Its eyes widened just a fraction, and in one fluid, shockingly fast motion, it stood up. I gasped. I couldn't help it. The sound was just ripped out of me. When it was crouched, I hadn't been able to grasp its size, but standing, it was huge. It had to be over 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was built, broad in the shoulders, and its arms were long, hanging down past its knees. That long brownish-black hair swung with the movement, a heavy curtain shifting on its body. It didn't growl. It didn't make a sound. It just turned and ran. The way it moved was terrifying. It wasn't a clumsy run. It was powerful, explosive. Its feet, I couldn't see them clearly, but they pounded the ground with a solid, heavy thump, thump, thump that I could feel through the soles of my own sneakers. It didn't run like a man, all upright. It had a slight forward lean, its long arms pumping, eating up the distance between the tree line and the deeper woods in seconds. It vanished into the shadows between the trees, and the sound of its running was replaced by the crashing of undergrowth, a sound that got fainter and fainter until it was gone. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. For a second, I just stood there, my brain trying to catch up. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a wild bird trapped in a cage. I felt cold all over, despite the summer heat. The terror didn't hit me all at once. It flooded in, a cold wave that started in my stomach and spread out to my fingertips, making them feel numb. I didn't think. I just moved. I scrambled down the ladder of the slide so fast I almost fell, my feet slipping on the rungs. I hit the grass and I ran. I ran for the back door of my grandmother's house like my life depended on it. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The image of that thing standing up, its hair swinging, its dark eyes, was burned onto the back of my eyelids. I burst through the screen door, the bang of it slamming shut behind me, echoing through the quiet house. My grandmother was in the kitchen peeling potatoes at the sink. She turned, a look of surprise on her face. "Good heavens, child, what's all the racket?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. I was panting, trying to catch my breath. The words tumbled out of me in a jumbled, hysterical rush. "Grandma, there was something in the backyard, by the slide. It was big and hairy, and it was watching me, and then it ran into the woods." She wiped her hands on her apron and came over, peering out the kitchen window into the backyard. What was it? A dog? A big one, maybe, or one of the Johnson boys from down the road playing a trick on you. "No," I insisted, my voice shaking. "It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a person. It stood up. It was huge. It had eyes, Grandma. It was watching me." She sighed, a gentle, dismissive sound. "It was probably just a stray dog, honey, or your imagination running away with you. This old house and those woods, they can make you see things sometimes." She patted my head. "Why don't you come help me with these potatoes?" That was it. That was the end of the discussion. To her, it was a closed case, a dog or my imagination. But I knew. I knew with every fiber of my 10-year-old being that what I had seen was neither of those things. The intelligence in its eyes, the way it moved, it was something else, something unknown. The rest of the day I stayed inside. I sat on the living room floor, supposedly watching TV, but I wasn't seeing the screen. I was just replaying those few seconds over and over in my head. The rustle, the crouched figure, the eyes, the sudden powerful stand, the run, the silence. Each time I replayed it, the fear felt fresh, a cold knot in my stomach. Later that evening, As the sun was starting to set and casting long orange shadows across the lawn, my grandma sent me out to gather my toys. "Go on now, it's getting dark. Bring your things in." I didn't want to go. I was terrified, but I was also a kid who did what she was told. I crept out the back door, my eyes darting towards the tree line every other second. The backyard felt different now. It wasn't my playground anymore. It was a place where something had happened, a place that had been violated by the unknown. I started picking up my toys, moving quickly, my baseball glove, a couple of action figures, and then I saw it. My toy robot. It was my favorite, a red and silver thing with light-up eyes. I'd left it right at the base of the slide that afternoon, before everything. But it wasn't where I left it. It was lying in the grass a few feet away, closer to the woods. That alone made my skin crawl. I walked over to it, my steps slow and hesitant. I bent down to pick it up, and the moment my fingers touched it, I knew something was wrong. The plastic was damp. Not wet from dew, it was too early for that, but damp, like it had been held in a sweaty hand. And it was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I turned it over in my hands. There was a faint, earthy smell to it, a smell of moss and damp soil, and something else, something musky, wild, an animal smell, but not one I could place, and it was positioned differently. I always kept the arms at its sides. Now one of its arms was bent, the little plastic hand raised slightly, as if it had been fiddled with, examined. That's when the full, chilling understanding settled over me. It hadn't just watched me from a distance. After it ran, or maybe before I even saw it, it had been closer. It had come right up to the slide. It had picked up my toy. It had held my robot in its hand, looking at it, curious about this bright, strange object left by the small, hairless creature on the metal structure. It wasn't just an animal. An animal might investigate with its nose, might even pick something up, but it wouldn't hold it, wouldn't manipulate it like that. This was something that used its hands, something intelligent, something curious. I snatched up the robot and ran back inside, my heart pounding all over again. I didn't tell my grandma about the toy. I knew she'd just say the grass was wet, or I was remembering wrong. I put the robot on my nightstand, and I didn't touch it again for the rest of my visit. It felt tainted. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I stared out the window into the pitch blackness where the woods were, half expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at me from the tree line. I kept thinking about it standing up, the sheer power in that movement. It could have easily come for me. It could have crossed the yard in seconds, but it didn't. It just ran away. It was as startled by me as I was by it. That thought is what has stuck with me all these years. The terror of that day is still there, a ghost of a feeling I can summon if I think about it too hard, but layered on top of it is this other, weirder feeling. It wasn't a monster. It didn't roar or charge. It peeked. It watched. It was curious. It even apparently liked toys. I never saw it again. We visited my grandma every summer after that, and I'd always find myself staring into the woods, hoping and fearing that I might catch another glimpse. I never did. But I never played on that slide alone again either. The memory is as clear today as it was then. The heat of the metal, the buzz of the insects, the smell of cut grass, and the way the air just went still when I saw it. The way its long hair swung when it stood, the heavy pounding sound of its feet hitting the ground, the damp, cold feel of my toy robot in my hands later. I can close my eyes and be right back there, 10 years old and frozen at the top of a slide, locked in a silent, curious stare with something that should not exist. Something that, according to my grandmother and everyone else, was just a dog or my imagination. But I know what I saw, and I know it saw me too. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder what it thought of me. Story 15. My sister was driving her beat-up old Ford Granada. I remember the way the cracked vinyl seat stuck to the back of my legs. I had the window down a bit, my elbow resting on the door, feeling the humid air rush past. We were just talking about nothing, really. What we were going to do when we got home. Whether we should stop for a soda. Normal, boring stuff. The road was practically empty. It was a holiday. And out there near Brewster, near the Alafia River, there just aren't that many people to begin with. We were coming up on the bridge over the river. It's not a big, fancy bridge or anything, just a concrete thing maybe 100 feet long, with those low metal railings on the sides. As we started across it, my eyes just naturally went down to the river. The water was brownish green, slow moving, and that's when I saw it. At first, my brain just went, man. A really big, really hairy man. He was crouched right at the river's edge, maybe 30, 40 feet down from the bridge. His back was to us, and he was bent over, cupping water in his hands and splashing it over his shoulders and back. It was such a human gesture, like someone trying to cool off after working hard, but something was off. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders were way too broad, and the arms, they were too long. They hung down, and when he moved to scoop more water, there was a powerful, fluid grace to it that was unsettling. I didn't even think. I just shouted, "Stop the car!" My sister jumped, startled. What? Why? Just stop right here. She hit the brakes, the car lurching to a halt right in the middle of the bridge. There was no one else around, no other cars to honk at us. The engine was still running, that low grumble filling the silence. I didn't even look back at her. I shoved my door open and ran the few steps to the railing, leaning over, my hands gripping the warm, rough metal, straining to see. The sound of the car door must have carried, or maybe he just felt me watching. Because as I leaned over, the figure stopped splashing. It went perfectly still, and then, slowly, it turned its head and looked straight up at me. Time just stopped. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a coldness wash over me that had nothing to do with the weather. It wasn't a man, the face. It was the most confusing thing I've ever seen. It was more human than any animal I'd ever encountered, but it was absolutely not human. The whole head was covered in dark, wet, matted hair, but the face itself was clearer, with darker, leathery skin. It had a heavy brow ridge, but underneath that, its eyes... God, its eyes. They were deep-set and intelligent. There was no panic in them, no aggression. Just a deep, calm, piercing curiosity. It was looking right into me, and I felt completely transparent, like it was seeing every thought I'd ever had. It didn't blink. It just held my gaze, and in that moment, the whole world shrunk down to just me and this thing on the riverbank. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful drumming. I could feel the blood pulsing in my neck, in my temples. My fingers were clamped so hard on the railing that my knuckles were white. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I was frozen, pinned by that stare. Then it moved. It didn't scramble or jump, it just stood up. It uncoiled from its crouch with a slow, powerful ease that made my stomach clench. It was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet. Its body was thick, built like a power lifter, covered in that same dark, shaggy hair that was plastered wet to its skin in places. The arms were incredibly long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands that weren't quite paws, but weren't human hands either. They were dark and looked strong. It just stood there at its full, terrifying height, still looking right at me. It was maybe 50 yards away, but I could see it perfectly. There was no fence, no barrier, just a short, grassy bank, and then the woods. The air was so still, I could hear the faint gurgle of the river, the idle of the car engine behind me, and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I could smell the wet earth, the swampy decay of the river, and a faint, musky odor I'd never smelled before. Something wild and pungent that I realized must be coming from it. It felt like we stood like that for an hour, but it was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. There was a communication happening, but not with words. It was a pure, raw exchange. My feeling was a jumbled mess of sheer terror, but underneath that, a staggering, profound awe. And looking into its eyes, I didn't see malice. I saw the same curiosity I was feeling. It was studying me just as I was studying it. Then it broke the stare. It turned its head, looking towards the dense line of trees behind it, and with that same unnerving grace, it turned its whole body and started walking up the bank. It didn't run, it didn't look back, it just walked, its strides long and deliberate, its powerful shoulders rolling with the motion. The hair on its back was long and almost swayed as it moved. In 3 or 4 steps it reached the tree line, and without a sound, it melted into the shadows between the pines and the palmetto bushes. It was just gone. The spell broke. "Get in the car! Get in the car! Now!" My sister's voice was a shrill, panicked shriek from the driver's seat. She was leaning over, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear I hadn't felt. She was terrified it was going to come for us. I stumbled back from the railing, my legs feeling like rubber. I practically fell into the passenger seat, pulling the door shut with a slam. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the seatbelt clicked. "Go, just go," I yelled. She didn't need telling twice. She stomped on the gas, and the car lurched forward, the tires squealing a little on the pavement. We sped across the rest of the bridge and down the highway. I twisted in my seat, my face pressed against the glass, staring back at the spot where it had disappeared. The woods were just a dark, solid wall. There was no movement, no sign that anything had ever been there. For the first minute, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind roaring through my still open window and the hum of the tires. I rolled it up and the sudden silence was deafening. I could smell that musky scent on my clothes, on my skin. I must have picked it up from the air on the bridge. What was that?" My sister finally whispered, her voice trembling. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I just shook my head. I couldn't form words. My mind was reeling, trying to process what my eyes had just seen. A bear? No way. The face was all wrong. The posture was all wrong. A person in a suit? That was even more ridiculous. The way it moved, the sheer size of it, the raw animal power. It was real. It was living, breathing, and it was something that wasn't supposed to exist. The terror didn't hit me like a wave until we were a few miles down the road. It was a slow, creeping cold that started in my guts and spread outwards. My teeth started to chatter. The intense curiosity and awe I'd felt on the bridge were getting swallowed up by a deep, primal fear. That thing had been so close. There was nothing between us but air. If it had wanted to, it could have been on the bridge in seconds. The thought made me feel sick. I kept replaying the moment it turned and looked at me. That face. It wasn't a monster's face. It wasn't snarling or drooling. It was calm, contemplative. It was the face of something that knew what it was, that knew I was something else, and that was just assessing the situation. The intelligence in its eyes was the most frightening part. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was a thinking, observing creature. We drove the rest of the way home in near silence. Every shadow at the edge of the road made me jump. Every shape in the ditches looked like a crouching figure. The world had suddenly become a place where the rules I knew didn't apply anymore. When we got home, we didn't tell our parents. What would we have said? We just went to our rooms. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, just staring at the wall. I could still smell that wild, musky odor. I took a shower, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, but I couldn't get the smell out of my nose or the image out of my head. The fear eventually faded into a kind of low-grade unease that lasted for weeks. But the awe that never went away. I hadn't been attacked. I hadn't been threatened. I'd had a moment of mutual recognition with something utterly unknown. It saw me, And I saw it, and in that split second we both knew we were looking at a mystery. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. I've read every book, every article I could find. I know what people call it, but that word feels cheap, like a label on a jar that can't possibly contain what was inside. It doesn't capture the weight of its presence, the depth in its eyes, or the way the air itself seemed to bend around it. It was real. I know what I saw. And sometimes, on quiet, humid nights when the shadows get long, I think about it still being out there, in those woods by the Alafia River, not as a monster, but as a secret the world is keeping. And I remember that for one brief, heart-stopping moment on a New Year's Day a long time ago, that secret turned and looked back at me, and then it just walked away, leaving me with a question that I will never, ever have an answer for. Story 16. It was one of those perfect October mornings in Kentucky, the kind that makes you remember why you put up with the humid summers. The air had that crisp bite to it, the kind that feels clean in your lungs. The leaves were just starting to turn, all yellows and reds, and the woods were so quiet you could hear a single leaf let go and spiral down. I'd been out since before sunrise, my breath making little clouds in the beam of my headlamp. I'm a hunter, have been since I was a kid, trailing after my dad. This is my place. These woods, these hills. I know them like the back of my hand. That day, I was deep in, following some logging trails that have been there for decades. I'd been tracking a decent-sized buck for a couple of hours, but he'd given me the slip. No big deal. It was getting on toward mid-morning, the sun was properly up, and I figured I'd head back to my four-wheeler, grab a drink of water, and maybe move to a different ridge. My ATV was parked right off an old service road, one of those gravel paths that the Forestry Service doesn't really maintain anymore. It was just sitting there, a big, hulking red Honda, a thing of metal and plastic that always felt so solid and out of place in all that quiet nature. I was about 10 yards away from it, just stepping out of the thicker undergrowth onto the road's edge, when I saw movement. It wasn't an animal movement. You get to know the way a deer moves, or a turkey, or even a bear. They have a certain flow to them. This was different. It was a flash of dark color, a shifting of shadow between the trees about 30 yards to my left. I stopped dead, my hand automatically going to the rifle slung over my shoulder. My heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm from the walk, just kicked up a notch. Then it stepped into view. It didn't burst out, it just emerged, like it had been there the whole time and had decided to let me see it. My brain short-circuited for a second. It was tall, so goddamn tall. It had to be over 8.5 feet, easy. It was standing on two legs, upright, just like a man, but no man was ever built like that. Its shoulders were insane, broad and rounded, as wide as the handlebars on my ATV. I remember that specific thought flashing through my head, because I was looking at the ATV and then back at the creature, and the proportions were just wrong. It was covered in thick, dark brown hair, but it wasn't just one color. There were these reddish streaks running through it like rust or old blood, especially around its massive chest and arms. Its arms were ridiculously long, hanging down past its knees, ending in what looked like dark, heavy hands. It had a heavy brow, this big, bony ridge that shadowed its eyes, and it seemed like it had no neck at all. Its head just sort of sat right on those monstrous shoulders. It was perfectly still, and it was watching me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. This wasn't fear. Not yet. This was pure, unadulterated shock. My mind was screaming questions that had no answers. What is that? What the hell is that? It was so physical, so dense. You could feel its presence, a weight in the air. The woods had gone dead silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath with me. Then it tilted its head, just a slight angle, like a dog that hears a curious sound. It was a strangely thoughtful gesture, and that made it 1,000 times worse. It wasn't just a dumb animal. There was something behind those eyes, something that was assessing me. That's when the first trickle of real fear, cold and sharp, went down my spine. I was still frozen, but some primal part of my brain was yelling at my legs to run. I didn't. My eyes darted to my ATV. It was my way out. It was safety. It was a machine, a thing that could carry me away from this at 30, 40 miles an hour. I took a slow, shuffling step backward, my boots scraping on the gravel. My hand, which had been hovering near my rifle, slowly dropped. I didn't want to make any sudden moves. I was fixated on the ATV. Just get to the ATV. Start it and go. I took another step, then another, my back to the creature now, which was a whole new level of terror. I could feel it watching me. I could feel its eyes on my back. I finally reached the machine, my fingers fumbling for the handlebars. The plastic was cool under my grip. This was it. I was going to get out of here. I was going to swing my leg over, turn the key, and that's when the terror erupted. I heard it before I saw it. A deep, guttural sound, not a roar, more like a harsh, grating cough. I spun around. It was charging. The word charge doesn't do it justice. It didn't run like a man or a bear. It was this powerful, loping sprint, unbelievably fast. It covered the 20 yards between us in a few seconds, its long arms pumping. The ground seemed to shake. It was coming right at me. And the sheer size of it, the raw power in its movement, emptied my mind of everything except a white-hot panic. I threw myself backward, away from the ATV, landing hard on my ass in the dirt and leaves. I was scrambling backward like a crab, my boots digging trenches in the ground. It didn't come for me. It went for the ATV. It swung one of those long, thick arms down in a wide arc. It didn't punch it. It was more like it swatted it. The sound was a sickening crunch of metal and plastic. The front end of the four-wheeler, which must have weighed 600 or 700 pounds, just lifted off the ground. It was effortless. It was like I'd lifted the corner of a cardboard box. The creature gripped the front rack with one hand. Its fingers, I can still see them, dark and thick, wrapping around the steel tube. The metal let out a high-pitched creak, a sound of pure stress. It held the front end up in the air for a second. The machine balanced on its back tires, and then it shoved. It just shoved the whole thing forward. The ATV slammed back down on its tires, but the momentum was too much. It tipped over onto its side with a crash that echoed through the trees. I heard the psh of gasoline spilling out, the sharp, sweet smell instantly filling the air. I was still on the ground, frozen. I couldn't even scream. My throat was locked shut. It stood over the overturned machine, its chest heaving. I could see the muscles working under that thick, matted fur. It wasn't panting from exertion. It was like it was fueled by pure anger. It looked down at the ATV, and then its eyes, those dark, intense eyes under the heavy brow, flicked up to me. The focus in its gaze was terrifying. It wasn't a mindless rage. It was a directed, controlled aggression. Then it did the thing that I still have nightmares about. It planted its feet, grabbed the underside of the ATV's frame with both hands, and flipped it. It didn't just roll it back onto its wheels. It flipped the whole goddamn thing completely upside down. The sound was awful. The crunch and groan of the chassis, the shattering of the plastic fenders, the glug, 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 as the rest of the gas poured out onto the ground. The weight of the machine came down on itself, and I saw the frame twist under its grip. It just manhandled it. It treated my big, tough, red Honda like it was a child's toy it was tired of. It stood there for a moment, over the wreckage, this giant, dark shape silhouetted against the bright October sky. The smell of gasoline was overpowering. I could feel the wetness of the dirt seeping through my pants. I was shivering uncontrollably. It turned its head toward me. This was it. I was sure of it. I was a goner. I was going to be ripped apart. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the impact, for the feeling of those hands. It didn't come. I heard a heavy, quiet footstep, then another. I forced my eyes open. It was walking away, not running, just walking, with that same powerful, deliberate stride back toward the tree line. It moved with an unnerving silence for something so huge. It reached the edge of the woods and it paused. It stopped and slowly, so slowly, looked back over its shoulder at me. The sun caught its eyes for a split second, and there was a glint there, a sharp, intelligent light. It wasn't the glint of an animal. It was a look, a message. It felt like a warning, a final, clear statement. This is my place. You do not belong here. Then it took one more step and vanished. It didn't crash through the brush. It just melted into the shadows between the trees and was gone. The silence rushed back in. For a long time, I just sat there in the dirt, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. My whole body was trembling. I tried to stand up, but my legs were jelly. I had to use my rifle as a crutch to get to my feet. The smell of gasoline was so strong, it was making me dizzy. I looked at my ATV. It was a wreck, completely upside down, the handlebars bent, plastic shattered everywhere, the frame visibly twisted. Gasoline was pooled all around it, soaking into the dry leaves. I don't know how long I stood there, just shaking. The reality of what had just happened started to sink in, and it was worse than the fear I'd felt in the moment. This was a deep, cold dread that settled in my bones. I finally made myself walk over to where it had been standing when I first saw it. The ground was soft from recent rain, and there they were, footprints. They were huge, long and wide, sunk deep into the earth. They weren't bear tracks, they were something else. Something that walked on two legs. A little further on, I saw a young sapling about as thick as my wrist that was bent over at a sharp angle, the bark scarred and splintered where a massive hand had grabbed it and shoved it aside. The entire thing, from the moment I saw it to the moment it disappeared, couldn't have lasted more than 2 minutes, maybe less. It felt like a lifetime. I ended up having to walk out. It took me over 3 hours to get back to my truck. I left the ATV there. I couldn't have moved it if I tried. I drove home in a complete daze. I didn't tell my wife the whole story for 2 days. I just said I'd wrecked the four-wheeler and had to walk out. I went back a week later with a couple of buddies and a trailer. The ATV was still there, a ruined heap. The footprints had been washed away by rain, but you could still see the scars on the ground, the crushed grass, the bent branches. I sold the ATV for scrap. I still hunt, but I stick to the edges now. I don't go deep into those old logging trails anymore. I can't. What haunts me isn't just the size of it or the strength, though my God, the strength to flip an ATV like it was nothing. It was the control. It wasn't a mindless monster. It was calculated. It didn't hurt me. It destroyed the machine. It made its point. It was like it was telling me that my technology, my metal and gasoline, meant nothing out there, that in its world, its power was absolute. That was in October of 2018. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, the smell of gasoline in my nose, and I see it standing there at the tree line, looking back at me with that glint in its eyes. I don't know what it was, I just know what I saw. And I know that for 2 minutes I was in its world, and it let me go. Story 17. All right, I'll just come out and say it. I saw something out there that I can't explain. Not then, not now, and typing this even years later, my hands are still a little unsteady. I need to get this off my chest. I've never posted anything like this online before, but I found this forum and figured if anyone would get it, it'd be you folks. So, this was back in the 70s, April of 1974. I was a security police officer, an SP, at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base down in Horry County, South Carolina. It was my job, my night to be precise, to patrol the perimeter roads. Most of it was boring as hell, just driving loops, checking fences, staring into nothing. But this one night is burned into my brain. It was a Thursday. I remember that because I was supposed to have Friday off for my kid's birthday. and I was already thinking about that, about getting home and getting some sleep so I could be halfway human for a party. My shift started at 6 in the evening, and by 9 o'clock, I was cruising down what we called Serpentine Road. It's this narrow, paved road that winds through a heavily wooded, restricted part of the base. It's not a place for joyrides. It's dark, it's isolated, and your only company is the pine trees and the sound of your own engine. The protocol for that stretch, especially at night, was to run with your headlights off. It was a tactical thing. If someone was out there where they shouldn't be, you didn't want to announce your arrival from a mile away with a pair of brights. You'd use the moonlight, get a feel for the road, and only flick the lights on if you saw something or came to a blind curve. It was a weird feeling, driving in near total blackness. You're just trusting your memory of the road, your hands on the wheel, feeling every little bump and dip. The dashboard lights were dimmed to almost nothing, just a soft green glow on the speedometer. Outside it was just shapes, darker shapes of trees against a slightly less dark sky. The air coming in through my cracked window was cool and damp, smelling of pine needles and that wet, earthy scent you get after a rain. We'd had a little drizzle earlier. The road was still dark and slick in patches. I had the radio on low, just some static and occasional broken-up chatter from the main gate, nothing important. I was just going through the motions, my mind a million miles away, thinking about a new bike I was putting together for my son. I was coming up on one of the sharper curves on Serpentine. You had to slow down for it. I remember my foot easing off the gas, the engine's rumble dropping to a low grumble. My hand went to the headlight switch almost on autopilot. It was a knob on the dashboard. You had to pull it out. I pulled it. The world exploded in light. My high beams cut through the darkness and landed right on it, maybe 60, 70 feet ahead, right in the middle of my lane. It was mid-stride, like I'd caught it in the act of crossing the road. For a split second, my brain just short-circuited. It didn't compute. It was tall, so goddamn tall. I'm 6 feet even, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in hair, a kind of light brown, dirty-looking fur that seemed to mat down in some places and stick out in others. It wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears out there. This wasn't that. The proportions were all wrong. It was built like a man, a massively powerful man. Broad shoulders, long arms that swung as it moved. Its legs were thick, muscular, but its head, it wasn't a bear's head. It was more rounded on top, and it kind of sat directly on its shoulders, no real neck to speak of. I didn't see its face clearly. It was turned partly away from me, but I got the impression of a heavy brow, a flat nose. The most chilling part was how it moved. It wasn't startled and frozen like a deer. The second my lights hit it, it reacted. It didn't look at me. It didn't make a sound. It was already in motion, and it just continued. But it changed its trajectory. It was heading from the woods on my left to the woods on my right. To its right was a drainage ditch, not a little gutter. This was a deep, wide culvert, a real ravine. I'd driven past it 100 times. We all knew it was there. It had to be at least 14, 16 feet across and probably 10 feet deep, full of muddy water and brambles. This thing didn't break stride. It was like watching a film in fast forward. In one fluid, powerful motion, it pushed off with its back leg and leaped. It didn't run and jump. It was a single, explosive leap from a standing start. Its body stretched out, those long arms reaching forward, and it just cleared the entire damn ditch. It was effortless. Like for it, a 16-foot chasm was a puddle you step over. It landed on the other side on both feet, its knees bending to absorb the impact, and then it was gone. It vanished into the wall of dark pine trees as if it had never been there. The whole thing, from the moment my lights hit it to the moment it disappeared, lasted 3, maybe 4 seconds. Tops. I slammed on the brakes. The tires squealed on the damp asphalt, and the patrol car skidded a little before stopping. I was thrown forward against my seatbelt, my heart trying to punch its way out of my chest. My hands were locked on the wheel, knuckles white. I just sat there, staring at the empty spot on the road where it had been. The high beams were still on, illuminating the empty pavement, the ditch, and the impenetrable woods beyond. My first thought wasn't Bigfoot or monster. My first thought was, what the hell was that? Followed immediately by, did I just see that? The silence was deafening, just the tick, tick, tick of the cooling engine and the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. I realized I was holding my breath. I let it out in a ragged gasp. I looked in my rearview mirror, nothing but darkness. I looked to my left, where it had come from, just trees. I looked ahead, to where it had gone. More trees. My training kicked in, or at least a ghost of it. I grabbed the mic for the radio. My hand was shaking so bad I fumbled it, and it clattered against the dashboard. I clutched it tight, my thumb pressing the transmit button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 2 on Serpentine," I said. My voice sounded thin, reedy, not my voice at all. A crackle. "Go ahead, Unit 2. I swallowed, my mouth bone dry. What was I supposed to say? I just saw a giant hairy man jump a ravine? They'd think I'd lost it. I'd been on the job for years. I had a reputation for being steady. I couldn't just say that. Dispatch, I've got a possible trespasser on foot in the restricted wooded area of Serpentine, headed east, away from my position. It was the best I could do. Technically true. Copy Unit 2. Do you require backup? Did I? What were they going to do? Comb the woods for a ghost? The thought of getting out of the car, of walking into that darkness with a flashlight, made my skin crawl. The idea of that thing being out there, watching me. No. Hell no. Negative dispatch, I said, forcing calm into my voice. The subject is no longer in sight. Appears to have fled the area. I'm continuing my patrol. Copy, keep us advised. I put the mic back. I didn't continue my patrol. I just sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, maybe more, just staring into those woods. The image was seared into my eyes. The way the light brown fur looked almost golden in my headlights. The sheer mass of it, the impossible agility, the way it moved. It wasn't clumsy or heavy, it was graceful, powerful, like an athlete. Awe. That's the only word for it. I felt a pure, stunned awe at what I had witnessed. It was immediately followed by a cold, deep fear that started in my gut and spread out to my fingers and toes. This wasn't fear of the unknown. This was fear of the known. I had seen it. I knew it was real. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if it had wanted to, it could have ripped the door off my patrol car like it was tinfoil. Eventually, I put the car in drive and crept forward. I stopped right where it had been standing. I got out of the car. I had to. I left the engine running and the headlights on, and I stepped out into the night air. It felt colder now. I had my service revolver on my hip, but I didn't draw it. It felt laughably inadequate. I walked to the edge of the ditch and shined my flashlight down. The beam was weak compared to the car's headlights. It was just a muddy trench filled with shadows. I swung the light across to the other side, to where it had landed. The ground was soft there, pine needles and wet soil. I was looking for a footprint, anything, but from where I was standing I couldn't see anything. No broken branches, no sign. It was as if it had never landed at all. That was almost worse. No evidence, just me and my memory. I finished my shift in a daze. Every shadow was a threat. Every rustle of leaves from the wind made me jump. I couldn't wait to get back to the security building. As soon as I clocked out, I went straight to my chief's office. He was an older guy, a lifer, seen it all. I knocked and went in. He was doing paperwork. "Chief, I need to report something," I said, closing the door behind me. He looked up, took one look at my face and put his pen down. "Sit down, son. You look like you've seen a ghost." I sat. I told him everything. I didn't leave anything out. The height, the fur, the leap, the way it moved. I didn't use the word Bigfoot. I just described what I saw. I watched his face. He didn't laugh, he didn't smirk, he just listened, his expression getting more and more grave. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking under his weight. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and serious. "You did the right thing telling me, but here's what we're going to do. We are not going to log this. We are not going to file a report." I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Think about it," he said. "You write that up. What happens? It becomes an official record. The OSI gets involved. They'll pull you in, question you for hours. They'll imply you were drinking or sleeping or seeing things. It'll be in your file forever, prone to hallucinations. Your career? Stalled. Maybe over. And for what? A report that will get filed away and labeled unexplained wildlife sighting or worse, hoax. Nobody will believe it. They'll just think you're crazy." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. "You saw something. I believe you. But some things are better left off the books. You understand me? You lock this one away. You tell your wife if you have to, but that's it, for your own good." I just nodded. He was right. I knew he was right. But it felt like a betrayal, like I was agreeing to pretend this monumental thing hadn't happened. I drove home as the sun was coming up. The world was turning pink and orange, looking normal and safe. I walked into my house. My wife was making coffee. She asked how my night was. "Quiet," I said. The lie felt heavy in my mouth. Just another quiet night. I went to my son's room. He was still asleep, surrounded by his toys. I looked at him, so small and peaceful, and all I could think about was that thing out in the woods, that immense, powerful, impossible thing. I thought about the sheer, raw physicality of it. The way it moved wasn't just fast, it was efficient. It was the movement of something that belonged there, something that was master of its environment in a way I could never be. I never saw it again. I patrolled Serpentine Road 100 more times before I eventually left the service. I never drove with my lights off on that curve again, not ever. Every single time I rounded that bend, my heart would be in my throat, my hand tense on the light switch, half expecting, half dreading to see it there again. But I never did. That's the thing that haunts me the most, I think, not the sight of it, terrifying as that was. It's the knowledge, the absolute rock-solid certainty that it was real. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was a living, breathing creature that defied everything I thought I knew about the world, and it's still out there, somewhere. I look at the woods differently now. I always will. I see a dense patch of trees, and I don't just see trees. I see a place to hide. I see a place where things that shouldn't exist do. My chief told me to lock it away, and I did, for a long, long time. But you can't really lock away a thing like that. It finds its way out. It's in my dreams sometimes. Not nightmares, not exactly. Just that same moment, frozen in time. The headlights hitting it, the brief pause in its stride, the explosive leap, and then the silence that was somehow louder than any scream. I saw it. That's all there is to it. I saw it, and I can't explain it, and I never will. Story 18. The rods were just props, really. We were sitting on the old wooden dock, our legs dangling over the edge, not talking much, just listening to the night. The water was black, a perfect mirror for the half moon and the scatter of stars above. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you file away in your memory to pull out on a bad day. Amy was leaning against me, her shoulder warm against mine. I remember the smell of her shampoo mixed with the damp, earthy smell of the lake. After a while, she shifted. "I'm going to grab a chair from the van," she said, her voice soft. "This dock is getting uncomfortable." I nodded. "All right. Want me to come with?" "Nah, I've got it. It's just up the trail." She gave my arm a squeeze and stood up, stretching. I watched her pick her way off the dock and onto the dirt path, that led back through the woods to the parking area where we'd left the van. The path was narrow, tunneled through thick trees, and the single motion sensor light on the cabin behind us only reached a little way in before the darkness swallowed everything. I turned back to the lake, listening to the gentle plink of my bobber in the water. I could hear Amy's footsteps crunching on the gravel and dry leaves, the sound getting fainter. Then it stopped, a few seconds of silence. Then I heard her call my name, not loud, but with a tightness in it. "Hey, you hear that?" I went still, listening. At first it was just the crickets. Then I heard it. A sound from deep in the woods, off to the left of the path Amy had just taken. It wasn't an animal sound I recognized. It was a whooping, a deep rhythmic whooping. Whoop, 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 whoop. It had a pattern to it, like a call. It wasn't frantic or scared. It was deliberate, and it was close, way too close for comfort. My skin prickled, the fine hairs on my arms standing up. I stood up slowly on the dock, the wood creaking under my weight. I couldn't see a thing past the first line of trees. It was a wall of black. Amy came hurrying back, her footsteps quick and nervous. She stopped at the edge of the dock, her eyes wide. "What is that?" she whispered. I tried to play it cool for her sake. My heart was starting to thump against my ribs, a dull, heavy beat. "It's just an owl," I said, my voice sounding a lot more confident than I felt. "A big one. A barred owl, maybe. They sound weird sometimes." She wasn't buying it. I could see the doubt in her eyes, reflecting the little bit of moonlight. "An owl? That doesn't sound like any owl I've ever heard." The whooping came again. Whoop, 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 whoop. It seemed to echo through the trees, bouncing around so you couldn't quite pinpoint where it was coming from. It was a heavy sound, a sound that came from a big chest. It didn't have the hollowness of a bird call. It was wetter, thicker. It felt intelligent. That's the only way I can describe it. It wasn't just random noise. It felt like a conversation we weren't a part of. "Seriously," I insisted, putting a hand on her back. "It's an owl. They make all kinds of crazy noises." I was trying to convince myself as much as her. I'd spent my whole life in rural Ohio. I'd heard every animal this state had to offer. Coons, coyotes, foxes, every kind of owl. This was different. This was wrong. We stood there for what felt like a long time, just listening. The sound would stop for a minute or two, and we'd start to relax, thinking it was over. Then it would start up again, always the same pattern, always from the same general direction, but never from the exact same spot. It was like whatever was making it was moving, pacing parallel to the trail, just inside the tree line where we couldn't see it. Amy was gripping my arm so hard, her nails were digging into my skin. I could feel a fine tremor running through her. The peaceful night was gone, completely shattered. The darkness, which had felt soft and friendly minutes before, now felt like a threat. Every shadow between the trees seemed to shift. Every rustle of a leaf made us jump. I remember the specific, stupid details you fixate on when you're scared. The way the cheap foam handle of my fishing rod was digging into my palm because I was holding it so tight. The cold sweat on the back of my neck, even in the warm air. The taste of the cheap beer I'd been drinking earlier, suddenly sour in my mouth. Amy's breathing was shallow and quick next to me. "Let's just go back to the cabin," she whispered, her voice thin with fear. I didn't argue. We left the rods right there on the dock. We walked back up that path, and it was the longest walk of my life. The motion sensor light didn't come on until we were almost on top of it. And for those few seconds before it triggered, we were walking blind through that dark tunnel, with that whooping sound still going on to our left. I had my arm around Amy, and I was walking half backwards, trying to watch the woods, my whole body tensed for something to rush out at us. My mind was racing, conjuring up shapes in the darkness. Was that a stump? Or something crouching? Was that just the wind in the branches, or was something big moving through them? We got to the cabin, fumbled with the door, and got inside, locking it behind us. We didn't say anything to my cousin or his family, who were watching TV in the living room. We just went straight to the guest room and closed the door. We lay in bed in the dark, not sleeping, just listening. The whooping went on for another hour, maybe more, before it finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, because now we didn't know where it was. The next morning, in the bright, rational light of day, it was easy to dismiss. We packed up our stuff, made our excuses, and left. I told Amy again it was probably just a weird owl, and she nodded, but she didn't look convinced. We didn't talk about it much after that. It became one of those strange stories you tell once in a while. Remember that weird night at the lake kind of thing. I'd think about it occasionally, that sound, and a little chill would go down my spine. But life moves on. Then about a year later, it all came crashing back. We were at home on the couch. It was a weeknight. Amy was flipping through channels and she landed on that show, Finding Bigfoot. I wasn't really paying attention. I was on my laptop, doing some work. It was just background noise. Then I heard it. My head snapped up. On the TV, one of the guys on the show was playing an audio recording, a supposed Bigfoot vocalization. And it was exactly the sound. Not similar, not kind of like it. It was a perfect match. That same deep rhythmic whooping. Whoop, 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 whoop. The same pattern, the same wet, chesty quality. It was like someone had reached into my memory and hit play. I looked at Amy. She was frozen. The remote held loosely in her hand. Her face had gone pale. She slowly turned her head to look at me, and her expression, I'll never forget it. It was pure, unadulterated shock. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open. All the color had drained from her face. It was the look of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just been flipped upside down in an instant. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. That look said everything. The dismissal, the rational explanations, the year of trying to forget, it all evaporated in that single silent moment. The weird owl I'd insisted it was, the thing I'd used to comfort her, was a lie we'd both agreed to believe. Hearing that sound come out of the television, given a name, a context, it made it real. It made what we'd heard at the lake real. She finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. That's it, that's the sound. I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. I felt cold all over. The cozy familiarity of our living room suddenly felt flimsy, like a stage set. The memory of that night came back with a terrifying clarity. The darkness of the woods wasn't just empty anymore, it was occupied. We hadn't just heard a strange noise, we had been listened to, we had been watched. That was the real terror moment, not the night by the lake with its immediate primal fear. This was worse. This was the slow dawning, soul-chilling horror of realization. The understanding that the world is a much bigger, much stranger, and much more frightening place than you ever allowed yourself to believe. The unease I'd felt that night, the feeling that the sound was intelligent, was confirmed in the most unsettling way possible. Amy has been a firm believer ever since. She reads about it, she talks about it. For me, I don't know what I believe. I'm not a Bigfoot believer in the way she is. I don't read the forums or watch the shows, but I know what we heard. I know it wasn't an owl or a coyote or anything the DNR has on its list of local fauna. I know that sound has lived in my head for over a decade, clear as day, and I know that when I heard it on that TV show, my blood ran cold. It changed our perspective on everything. We live in a rural area, surrounded by woods. I used to walk our property line without a second thought. Now, I'm always aware. I notice when the woods go quiet for no reason. I find myself looking over my shoulder. I see the deep woods not as just trees, but as a place where things can hide, big, unknown things. It opened a door in our minds that can't be closed, a door to the possibility that there are still corners of this world, even in familiar old Ohio, that hold secrets we can't explain. And sometimes, on a quiet, still night, when the wind is just right, I'll stop whatever I'm doing and just listen, a part of me half expecting and half dreading to hear that familiar rhythmic whooping call from the darkness just beyond the tree line. Story 19. That particular night, my mom was driving us home from my aunt's house. It was late, probably past 10, and a real pea-soup fog had rolled in, the kind that makes the world feel small and muffled. The headlights just bounced back at us, making a little glowing tunnel in the dark. I was slumped in the passenger seat, probably half asleep, just watching the trees zip by. They're mostly tall, skinny pines out there, packed tight together, with these dark gaps between them that just swallow the light. I remember shifting in my seat, trying to get comfortable, and that's when I saw it. Just a flicker of movement in the trees, way off to the right of the car. At first, I thought it was a deer. You see them all the time, their eyes glowing in the headlights. But this was different. It was too tall, way too tall, and it wasn't bounding or hopping. It was moving, just gliding really, keeping perfect pace with the car. My mom had the cruise control set to 45. I remember seeing the needle on the dash, and this thing was matching us effortlessly. My brain just sort of stuttered. I remember thinking, no, that's not right. That's not a deer. I sat up straighter, my forehead almost touching the cold glass of the window, my breath making a little fog on it. I wiped it away with the sleeve of my hoodie. The fog made it hazy, but I could see the shape. It was upright on two legs, and it was massive. I'm not talking about a big guy in a coat. I'm talking about something that made the pine trees look skinny. It was covered in this dark, shaggy hair, like a wet bear, but it was moving like a man, a huge, impossibly huge man. My heart started doing this weird thump, thump, thump against my ribs, so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out all thin and reedy. She must have heard the fear in it because she glanced over at me. "What is it, baby? You see a deer?" I couldn't even answer. I just pointed, my finger trembling, towards the tree line. She leaned forward, squinting through the foggy windshield. The thing was still there, a monstrous shadow flowing between the trunks. It wasn't crashing through the underbrush. It was moving smooth, like water, like it knew every inch of that woods and the trees just parted for it. And then it angled towards the road. My mum gasped. It was a sharp, sucked-in breath. The creature came out of the trees and onto the gravel shoulder of the road like it was nothing. It didn't break stride. One second it was in the woods, the next it was running right beside my window, not 15 feet away. That's when the real terror set in, the kind that turns your bones to ice water. It was running on two legs, its arms pumping, but it wasn't a clumsy run. It was powerful, graceful even. It was keeping up with a car going 45 miles an hour, like it was a light jog. The sound of our tires on the asphalt was loud, but underneath it I swear I could hear the thud of its feet hitting the ground, a heavy, solid thump, thump, thump that I felt more than heard. The headlights caught it then, full on. I saw every detail, burned into my brain forever. It had to be over 8 feet tall. Its body was thick with muscle, covered in this matted, dark brown hair that was slicked down in places, maybe from the fog. Its arms were long, swinging past its knees. But its face is what I see in my nightmares. It wasn't an ape face. It wasn't a man's face. It was leathery, like old, wrinkled leather, and it seemed almost hairless. And its eyes, oh God, its eyes, they glowed. Not like an animal's eyes reflecting light, but like they had their own light inside them. This bright, fiery orange. They were fixed ahead, not on us, just focused on running. But for a split second they shifted, and I felt them look right at me, right through the glass and into me. It wasn't a dumb animal look. It was intelligent, calculating. I was frozen. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. I just stared, my whole body locked up. I could smell the pine scent from the car air freshener mixed with the faint smell of my mom's coffee, and it all felt so normal and so wrong at the same time. It surged ahead. In 2, maybe 3 of those powerful gliding strides, it was past my window and alongside the back of the car. I twisted in my seatbelt digging into my neck, my eyes wide. It swung one of those long, thick arms. The sound was horrible. A deep, metallic thud that shook the entire car. It wasn't a scrape or a bump, it was a punch. The car shuddered, the frame vibrating. I felt the impact in my teeth. My mom let out a short, sharp scream and her foot slammed down on the accelerator. The engine roared and the car leaped forward. I was still twisted around, staring out the back window. For a second, I saw it there, standing in the middle of the road behind us, its orange eyes glowing in the red of our taillights. It was just a silhouette, a massive black shape against the fog, and then it was gone. It didn't run back into the woods. It just vanished into the darkness, like the night had swallowed it whole. The car was dead silent except for the whine of the engine and the sound of our ragged breathing. My hands were shaking so bad I had to clench them between my knees. My whole body was trembling. I looked over at my mom. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her face pale and slick with sweat. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Mom, did you see that?" She just nodded, her eyes glued to the road, driving way too fast for the foggy conditions. She didn't say a word for a full 5 minutes. We just sped down that dark road, the trees a blur on either side, both of us too terrified to look anywhere but straight ahead, waiting for it to appear again. When we finally saw the lights of the first gas station, a little beacon of safety, my mom pulled in so fast the tires crunched on the loose gravel. She parked under the bright fluorescent lights, right next to a pump, and killed the engine. We both just sat there for a minute, breathing. We should check the car," she said, her voice hoarse. I didn't want to. I didn't want to get out. I felt exposed, like those bright lights were just making us a better target, but I unbuckled my seatbelt with fumbling fingers and opened the door. The night air was cold and damp, and it smelled like gasoline. We walked to the back of the car together, huddled close, and there it was. On the trunk, right above the license plate, was a dent. It wasn't huge, but it was deep, like something had hit it with tremendous force. The metal was pushed in, and coming off the dent were these long, deep scratches in the paint. 4 parallel grooves, like something had dragged claws across it, and in the scratches and smeared around the dent was this dark, grimy residue. It was almost black, and it had a smell, a weird, musky, earthy smell, like wet dirt and old leaves and something else, something animal. I leaned in closer against my better judgment, and the smell made my stomach turn. My mum reached out a trembling hand but didn't touch it. She just stared. I looked at the back passenger side window, the one I'd been looking out of, and there, on the glass, was a handprint. It wasn't a perfect print. It was smeared, like it had been dragged, but you could see the shape. It was huge. The palm was massive, and the fingers were long, too long. It was outlined in that same dark, greasy residue. That's when the full-body chills hit me, a cold wave that started at the base of my skull and washed all the way down to my feet. My knees felt weak. That thing had touched the car. It had been that close. It had struck the car with enough force to dent it, and it had put its hand on the window right next to where my head had been. We drove the rest of the way home in total silence. We didn't turn on the radio. We just listened to the hum of the tires. Every shadow at the side of the road made me jump. Every pair of headlights in the distance felt like a threat. When we got home, my mom called the Suwannee County Sheriff's non-emergency line. She didn't say Bigfoot or monster. She said we'd hit something, or something had hit us on the road, and we'd seen a large animal. They transferred her to a wildlife officer. I sat at the kitchen table listening to her side of the conversation. She described what happened. The officer was polite, but I could tell by my mum's frustrated tone that he wasn't taking it seriously. He said it was probably a bear standing on its hind legs, running 45 miles an hour next to a car, with glowing orange eyes and a leathery face. He said the dent and scratches were consistent with hitting a deer or a large hog. He said the residue was probably just road grime. He told us to be more careful driving at night. We never washed that handprint off. For weeks, every time I got in the car, I saw it, a greasy, dark reminder on the glass. My mum finally took it to a car wash a month later, after I begged her, because I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. But you can't wash away a memory like that. For weeks, I had nightmares. Not every night, but often. I'd dream I was back in the car, and the thing would be there, running beside me, and it would turn its head and look at me with those orange eyes, and then it would slam into the car over and over until I woke up sweating, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The worst part, the thing that still haunts me, wasn't just the size or the strength, it was the way it moved, that smooth, gliding run. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't scared, it was in control, it was toying with us, it knew it could keep up, it knew it was faster, it chose to hit the car, it chose to let us go. That's the realization that stuck with me, that still sits in the pit of my stomach. We were in a 2-ton metal machine, and this thing, this animal, whatever it was, made us feel completely and utterly powerless. It intimidated us. It showed us we weren't at the top of the food chain out there in those dark pine woods, and then it just disappeared. No trace, no explanation, just a dent, some scratches, a handprint on a window, and a memory of glowing orange eyes in the fog that I will never, ever forget.